Hello,
Liftoff.
interwebs. That's it. Blast off. Hello, interwebs. It is I, Hewlett, David Hewlett, with another. I'm with Stargate Genius, and today we've got something really special because Justin here is looking at things from the other side of history. Here, looking back on some of the technology we're doing. Justin, would you first off welcome? And if you wouldn't mind, could you just sort of introduce yourself and let everyone know what you do?
Sure. So my name is Justin Walsh. I am professor of art history, archaeology, and space studies at Chapman University, which is located just outside of Los Angeles. And I'm sitting here in Los Angeles right now. So good morning.
I'm trying not to be jealous because it's -20 out there right now for me.
It's a little cloudy here.
Oh yeah. I remember saying that to friends too. Oh yeah.
It's a little cloudy. No,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm an archaeologist. I originally started my career as a Mediterranean archaeologist, working on the ancient Greeks
Oh
and especially how
nice.
they traveled around the Mediterranean. And then I got interested in outer space and the archaeology of human activity in outer space. So that started in about 2008 when a student asked me a question. Maybe we can talk about that if you want.
Mm.
But when a student asked me a question in a class, and I was like, "Oh my God, I never thought about this." And then we kind of went on to explore it, and it was fascinating.
What was the
So since
question?
two,
What was the question that got you looking down to up?
yeah, so it was a course on cultural heritage.
Mm.
It was a kind of graduate seminar for students who were going to go into the art world.
Mm.
And she raised her hand and she said, "What about stuff in space? Is that heritage?" And this was like a
Yeah.
total brain melt kind of question.
Which is what
But as
happened
soon
to
as
me from talking to you the last time. Like I just said before we started, I'm now looking at all technology as like, well, I wonder what we're gonna look back on that as, in 100 years or whatever.
we aim to spread this disease to
Yes,
everyone. Yes,
yes,
exactly. That's
yes,
what
yeah,
we're doing here.
exactly. Yeah,
So yeah. So she asked that question, and as soon as she asked it, I thought, well, like Tranquility Base on the moon, that's an archaeological site, a
yeah,
pristine. You could even say a pristine one, right? Because it's been sitting there at that point, for almost 40 years.
yeah.
Now, obviously, for more than 50 years, and nobody's gone back. So the only effects on it have been kind of the environmental effects of
Right, right, right,
cosmic radiation and the temperature changes and maybe micrometeoroids, things like that.
right.
And so you could go back and you could definitely do like a forensic study. Like what exactly did Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin get up to while they were there? How
Mm-hmm.
did they actually interact with this landscape? But you could also do what archaeologists do here on Earth, which is to go beyond that kind of like reconstruction of activities to say like what are the meanings of these objects and
Right.
what do they tell us about the society that created them and placed them here? So
Mm.
we could talk about Tranquility Base as a site that's deeply embedded in the Cold War
Yeah,
and
yeah.
in competition and
Mm.
masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And you could even then, thinking beyond that, you could compare it to other space societies
Yeah.
like ISS, which we'll talk a lot more about, I think. But the International Space Station obviously is a multinational, multilingual, multi-gender, and also cooperative
Yeah.
project
Yeah.
between many different nations. So in that respect, it's quite different
Yeah.
from Tranquility Base. So you can start to characterize kind of different space cultures
Yeah.
through archaeology by looking at the equipment. Like, what is the level of technology here, or how is this interface designed, or what kinds of activities were happening here?
Mm.
What does that tell us about the priorities of the people who were doing this, right, carrying this out? So I said, go write your term paper on that. And she discovered all kinds of interesting stuff, and it kind of got me down a wormhole about like the fact that all of space is international territory, and so
Mm.
we actually can't protect heritage in space
You
currently,
you
although
can't
several.
because so if someone wants to land by beside the last lander, they're hey, no problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, nobody has any jurisdiction or sovereignty over anywhere in space.
Wow.
So the site, let's say, of Tranquility Base is completely unprotected. Anybody can go anywhere they want. In 2011, NASA published a white paper with some guidelines
Mm-hmm.
about protecting important sites like Apollo 11 and 17 in particular, but
Mm-hmm.
also all of the other kinds of sites that are up there. And they kind of set different levels of protection. So for Apollo 11 and 17, there are actually these kind of proposed keep out zones, hard keep out zones. You cannot get within 75 meters of Apollo 11, and I think it's 225 meters of Apollo 17, because that's kind of the boundary of the activity that happened there. But you could land your spacecraft right next to that, and you can imagine that the exhaust from that spacecraft, of course, would likely obliterate everything that was right next to it.
Of course.
In fact, actually, based on our modeling of regolith, that you may actually need to land over the horizon from a site in order not to spray it with ejecta.
Of course.
But that's not a rule or a law. It's simply a suggestion, and it has no legal force at all. This white paper. So there's actually a group of us that are working to develop an international protocol that will be at the level of like a treaty that nations can sign on to, that will say we are going to respect heritage in space. Fabulous. But at the moment, that doesn't exist.
We've spoken to a couple of space lawyers, and that's something that's only just been touched on. But it is. I mean, it's true. We're going to miss it if it's gone, right? I mean, it's if only we kept that. If only we knew how to do this.
I would argue that Tranquility Base is the most important archaeological site that we know of that exists, that we've identified that exists, because it will always be the first place that humans set foot on something that isn't the Earth.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of those level of firsts that we can directly point to and say we know exactly where that happened.
Yeah. We dig up a village, big deal. It could have been an old village. It's not the first village.
Yeah, it might have the earliest evidence we know of for some technology or some activity, but that doesn't mean it was the earliest. This was the earliest.
It's literally that, and this is the technology and tools we use to get there. This is all of which is going to be obsolete by, God knows.
Well, it's certainly already obsolete, but that's kind of the thing, right? Like, we can't recreate that site. We can't, and like, how would you even visit it in a way that's safe? Our level of operating knowledge on the moon, I calculated it not too long ago. I think we have a total of something like 28 person days of direct experience with the lunar environment through all of the Apollo crew. Whereas like look at ISS, where we actually have over 125 years of person years of experience. In that environment, like we really know how to do low Earth orbit right now. We really don't know how to do the moon in terms of our own personal interaction with that environment yet.
Yeah.
So the argument that I and others are making is we really shouldn't go close to those places if we can avoid it. And what that student discovered, this was what kind of took me down that hole, was that there was the Lunar X Prize, the Google Lunar X Prize. So that had just been announced in 2007, and they were incentivizing groups to go to the moon, send a rover that would travel 500 meters on the surface, and send back video. And the first team to do that would get $20 million.
Right.
And the second team would get $5 million. And then there were these $1 million bonus prizes. If you had a diverse team working on your project, or if you rolled 1,500 meters instead of 500 meters. And there was one that was actually literally called the Heritage Bonus Prize. That was if you visited a previous landing site.
Oh my God!
And sent back video. Yeah. So they were incentivizing these visits, and all of these teams, which like $20 million would not come close to paying their costs. They were looking like, how can we check off all of these boxes and get as much money as we can if we win this thing? They were all saying, we're going to go to Apollo 11. We're going to go to Apollo 17.
Yeah.
Few of them said to other sites, but many of them said, no, we don't want. We want to go for the famous ones because they're sexy, of course. Like that would make a big splash. And so the very first thing that I ever wrote about space archaeology was an op-ed with the student in the Los Angeles Times, arguing that the heritage bonus should be withdrawn.
Yeah.
And the X Prize people said, well, we don't think we should be in the position of making the rules for how people operate in space. It's like, you created the incentive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, I didn't do that.
We're not making the rules. We're just giving $1 million to screw them up. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So those consequences are really somebody else's problem.
Wow.
Fortunately, of course, there were no successful landings as part of the Lunar X Prize, but several teams have continued to try and do that, and fortunately, they have all directed their attention away from those historic landing sites. But what we initially feared and argued about in the article, we said, like, our biggest fear is not that some rover will like roll over a footprint, but that there would be a catastrophic near success. That is to say that in the process of landing, because none of these teams had the experience before.
Right.
In the process of landing, you crash into the site and completely destroy it.
Right.
Right.
And they've had a lot of landers that, fall over.
Including some of those competitors, Space IL with Beresheet, right? And iSpace with Hakuto. Those two were absolutely competitors in the X Prize competition, and they both had catastrophic failures.
Wow.
So and at about like 1,000 meters off the surface, they lost control and smashed into the moon. Luckily, they were nowhere near a heritage site. But that's exactly what we were worried about, and it's exactly what happened in 2019 and 2022, I think. So yeah,
there's got to be pushback, though, I'm assuming, right? Because most people are going to be going like, look, yeah, whatever, we just want to get to the moon, what's the big deal? But again, it's that if we don't know where we've been, we can't learn from our mistakes, we can't learn and improve situations for people going forward.
I don't have a problem with people trying to go to the moon.
No,
I have a problem with if they choose to land on or adjacent to a heritage site, especially one of such signal importance, that they put it at risk. Like to me, if you're going to create a situation that is risky, you have to argue why it is necessary to take that risk and what you are going to do to mitigate that risk. And that is not
consider it, which in most cases, I guess, is not even considered, right? I mean,
they literally do not have to, but I would argue that it is morally incumbent upon them to do so. So
what we're working on. I mean, is there a way to? I mean, I guess it's not the same, but is there any? Could there be plans to sort of capture the site in some kind of a incredible high detail or something to allow us to be able to
document it in that way? Yeah. So certainly documentation is really good, but so my very first academic publication in space archaeology was a paper that I wrote in 2012 in the journal Space Policy, which I have to tell you was a wild feeling for an archaeologist to be publishing in Space Policy. But basically what I was saying was, like, we have lots of treaties here on Earth that are widely accepted by the international community, and they govern how heritage is managed in international territories like the high seas or Antarctica. We actually have already thought about this in those locations. So my argument in that article was simply that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we should do is we should look at these existing treaties that everybody thinks are just fine for here on Earth and say, like, what are the parts of each of those that are most relevant to what we want to protect, on the moon or on Mars or in low Earth orbit, because all of those are places where there's historic equipment now and evidence of human activity, even on Titan, for example, or in deep space, the void, those are all historic missions. And, not that the Voyagers are under any threat at the moment, but I'm just saying we like that's how far out this reaches. So what can we do? And there are best practices, like if a historic object is not facing any current threats to its integrity, you should leave it where it is. Because the thing that's going to create the biggest threat to its integrity is doing something on or around it.
Which is exactly the archaeology problem too, isn't it? Where it's like, how do you balance the learning from these sites and damaging
100%. 100%. But what archaeologists do, if you ever came to a site where we were working and you watched how we do this, is when we discover an artifact in the soil, we don't just like wrench it out of the ground. Like, oh my God, we found this cool thing. Rip.
Right.
We don't do that. What we do is, depending on the fragility of the object, we will work around it and around it and around it, and gradually remove whatever soil or other material that's around it, if we can. If we can't, we just don't. But if we can, we'll remove that material to the point where we're not using the metal point of a trowel. We're using like a popsicle stick, right, something like that, or a brush, or a dental pick, right? These different kinds of tools that allow us to work. Absolutely. So especially like if you're excavating human remains, you're being very careful because that bone or other bone material is very fragile after being in the ground that long. Maybe it's damp, and so it's friable. So you work very, very careful, and it does not come out until it cannot do anything except come out.
Right.
right? Until there's no other thing that can be done then it's completely out, and you pick it up and you care for it. You even have sometimes you even have conservators working on the object while it's being excavated. Right. So the way conservators work is the same way, that they only apply techniques and substances to artifacts that are reversible.
Huh.
Right. So you're not putting like crazy glue or super glue on an object. You're
Right.
putting on a kind of an epoxy that you can remove with just nail polish remover. Right. That kind of
Wow.
so that you can reverse what you've done
In case something goes
that
wrong,
this
you've got
this
it.
is best practices.
Yeah,
So how do we apply that then to this domain? I was about to say this new domain, but what I really want to argue is that it's not new.
yeah.
That space is part of the environment we exist in,
Mm.
and therefore the considerations that we give to things in the terrestrial environment should also be replicated in that environment.
Absolutely. No, it's
It's
fascinating.
it's not different.
No.
And
No.
heritage is one of the ways that I really try and make that case. Think about resource extraction on the moon or on settling Mars, these kinds of things. Okay, well, what have we learned from what we do on Earth about the consequences of that?
Yeah.
And how can we apply those thoughts to those places?
Yeah.
Because we should be treating them as pristine.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it works around the world, but like the national parks I've been to, it's pack in, pack out, leave no trace, right? That kind of thing. How do we do that?
Yeah.
We shouldn't just be saying like it's out there in space, so we don't have to care about it.
Well, especially since we know, like you say, we know this is the first place that we landed on the moon. We know this is a historic site. In other cases, we're having to try to find them. We know they're there. We could do such a great job if we do it right now. We get a dome on that thing or something like that would be.
If we could do that in a way that was safe.
Yeah.
And didn't like, again, like a dome sounds great. Like you could do it in Futurama, right?
Yeah.
But fine. But how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. What are all the plans that you need to have in place to do that so that you don't damage the site?
Oops. Yeah. Like our dome fell in. Yeah. Or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Everything we do has consequences. The question is like, how do we mitigate or avoid those consequences? Right. So and avoidance is the way to have the least consequences.
Right. Just go, that's a no-fly zone.
I'm not saying we'll never visit there. I'm not saying we'll never study it. I'm just saying like we have to learn how to operate in those environments before we take those risks.
I think that's amazing though, because if you could go in as a space archaeologist to examine that site, the stuff you could learn from it compared to someone who was just there to build a moon base or something. I mean, just going to have you, as you say, as soon as you start moving stuff, you're changing the history, basically. Do you see, I mean, if we're going to go settle on the moon, I'm assuming we're going to need then archaeologists to come up and do exactly that.
Well, I don't think everybody would say we need that, but I think we need that.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say like that's kind of low down the list.
But ideally, that would be, if you're going to have
agreed.
If you plan on having a society on another terrestrial body, terrestrial body? No, not terrestrial body. On the moon.
Celestial.
Thank you very much. We need to preserve it. That's
I would agree, but I would also even say, like, obviously that's part of the story that you tell, right? About why we're going there or what the value of this is. At the same time, there are lots of different perspectives on the moon and on other celestial bodies of what they mean, how we should treat them or interact with them. And another thing that obviously we haven't seen a lot of in space activity to date is any kind of reckoning with the perspectives and interests of people who are disenfranchised from those conversations. Indigenous peoples, for example, around the world, people whose nations are not wealthy enough to participate in space activity, even though the governing document for space activity, which is the 1967 United Nations Outer Space Treaty, says that any development of space has to be to the benefit of all of humanity.
Right.
We haven't really seen that.
It's like the oceans. The ocean's the same thing where everyone has to have the
law of the sea.
Yeah, law of the sea, basically. Wow. I mean, it does feel very much like we're in sort of the early cowboy days of
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and we're with all of the same almost sort of racist and colonialist kind of approaches again. It seems silly that we are repeating mistakes that we've made before. you know.
Well, in some respects, those people find it easier to make those arguments because of the claim that there's no life there,
Right.
which is
That we
actually
know of.
something
That we know of. Yeah.
That's just what I was going to say.
Right.
First of all, we don't truly know that that's the case. I mean, most people think that the moon has no atmosphere, but it does actually have a micro atmosphere. And we don't know what. I mean, it's unlikely. I'm not saying that it's likely that there's life on the moon. Although, of course, we know about tardigrades and their ability to survive. You know, so maybe
And
Beresheet actually sent tardigrades to the moon
and crashed in the process, right?
Exactly.
That was when I heard that, I was like, so we've just colonized the moon. I mean, potentially we have just colonized the moon.
Maybe like we don't know. And then the other thing is, you know, Mars we suspect has no life now, but it might have had life in the past.
Right.
And so obviously, you know, the space agencies take lots of precautions to try not to forward contaminate,
right,
so that they can, so that their findings actually have significance if they do find traces of life or past life, right? But I and I think many other scholars who think about space ethics would also argue that whether a place has life or not is not enough of a reason not to treat it like an environment. It has climatic processes, it has geologic processes that we might interfere with, we don't fully understand, right? So, I mean, like I said, in the pack in, pack out, these are pristine landscapes.
Yeah.
And so we should certainly be aware of what our activities are, what potential consequences there are, et cetera. And archaeology certainly is a way that we can talk about. We can I was talking about telling stories, but we can hopefully convince the public, yes, that this is something you should be thinking about. Because let me ask you, how much human material do you think there is on the moon?
God, I have no sense.
In tons.
Oh, in tons? I mean, it can't be much. I mean, it's got maybe a few tons, maybe 10 tons, maybe. What about that?
Current estimates are over 200, possibly 300 tons.
Seriously?
Of human-made material on the moon.
Oh my God! So we're already littering.
And in fact, like I had a talk with NASA's chief technologist back when they had a chief technologist before they completely axed that office, and he was talking about how can we use the material that we've already put on the moon as an in situ resource,
right,
to help us build the habitats that we or maintain the habitats.
Break it down, use it for 3D printing, or all sorts of stuff. Yeah,
sure. And from a sustainability point of view, that makes a ton of sense. I would just argue, like, let's not use the really historic stuff. But right. So there's like a Saturn rocket body lying on the moon because it was safer for us to just send it in that trajectory. There are other impact sites. You know, those things may be less significant, but and may have material that's usable. Okay, fine. But let's at least have that conversation. But my point is simply that we've put enough stuff there that is now an in situ resource, or all of the artificial objects that are in low Earth orbit. You know, where people are worried about the Kessler effect and the kind of chain reaction collision that could make space unusable for us, or at least low Earth orbit unusable for us, like in gravity. But that's also, it cost a lot of money and a lot of effort to put that metal up there.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you could turn it into something else rather than just trying to get rid of it? That's another good question. Again, I would say don't use Hubble for that. Don't use don't use the Vanguard 1, which is the oldest satellite that's still in orbit from 1958. Don't use these historic objects, But sure, I understand the sustainability idea too.
Yeah, that's a tough one though, isn't it? Because I mean, the satellites, they're sort of I always said they're like designed like cars that when you run out of gas, you just abandon them by the side of the road. And I mean, so do you think we should be preserving those satellites? Like, you mean in orbit, or actually trying to decommission them and bring them down so we've got them for ourselves?
It's a great question, right? So what is the best way to handle that? So first of all, there are extraordinary historic objects in space. No, I named two American ones, but there are Indonesia has its first satellite up there. Indonesia is a vast country spread over a huge territory that allowed them to communicate across that archipelago for the first time. Right? That's really historic for them. Right? Each country has its own, like, this is our our first.
Yeah.
We got up there,
India
right?
as well. Yeah.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
exactly, right. So there are lots of examples of these objects that different arguments can be made for,
Mm,
right? You ask about how do we preserve them.
mm.
As I said a second ago, the best way to preserve them is that if they're under no threat, is to leave them where they are.
Right. Right. If
We
they can
also,
be avoided, let's just avoid them. Right.
and if they're not causing a threat to other objects,
Mm,
right,
mm,
which is certainly an issue, we
mm.
know, um, that's something to think about, right? So we or potentially people have talked about moving them to a higher, more stable orbit, because the lower you are, even if you are in low Earth orbit, there are little traces of atmosphere up there that cause drag
Right.
on the object, slows them down, gradually causes them to descend, and eventually they do get captured by the atmosphere, and they mostly burn up, or they burn up
Right.
completely, and
Right.
what's left of them goes into the Pacific Ocean, or actually just right down in, in your neighbor's driveway.
Right. Right. Depending. Yeah.
Whatever it is, where, depending on how controlled that process is.
Right.
But so boosting them to a higher orbit would allow them to stay in space and protected from
Mm.
threats to their integrity
Until we
for
can figure
potentially
out how best.
centuries. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For potentially centuries, and that's a good thing. But, like, first of all, how do you capture it?
Yeah.
And second of all, how much will it take to boost it and then let it go? And
Mm.
how much is that going to cost you?
Yeah.
Right? For an object like the Hubble Space Telescope, which is like the size of a bus,
Mm.
that's going to be a very significant mission. And
Yeah.
they are currently talking about boosting, because it's still functional. They're still talking about boosting it so that it continues to observe.
Right. Right.
And I might say, well, okay, that's a good test case for can we boost it to the graveyard
Right.
orbit, if you will,
Yeah, that's interesting. Having sort of a graveyard, having sort of a historical graveyard orbit, which,
museum
yeah,
orbit,
museum
whatever
orbit. I
you want to
love it.
call
Yeah,
whatever you want
yeah.
to call it, right?
That's very sci-fi.
ISS, is a historic object. It's
Yeah,
the
we got to
largest
talk about that
spacecraft.
because that is, yeah.
It's the largest spacecraft. It's the longest inhabited spacecraft, the most
Mm,
expensive thing humans have ever built.
mm,
All these superlatives. And what are we going to do? Well, because of this problem that's foreseen that it's going to break up and create a risk,
mm.
they have NASA is paying SpaceX to develop a version of Dragon that will push it down into the atmosphere
Yeah,
so that it goes into the Pacific Ocean
yeah, yeah.
rather than anything else. Now, just to go back, by the way, the U.S. Navy owns the Vanguard 1 satellite. And there have been conversations, including a conference paper that was given about a year ago, about could we go and get it? Because the Navy is like, we have the number one object, first object in space. It's
Right,
like, okay, you want to go get it, but how can you be sure that you're going to get it without damaging it?
right.
Right? How are you sure that you're going to bring it back? And, like, what is the value ultimately of doing that now?
Mm,
And
mm.
would you be
And who pays
testing?
for it?
Would you be testing these techniques on other objects that you consider less significant first, or are you just going to go straight for Vanguard 1?
Mm,
Right? Like, these are, those are important questions for what is currently the object that best represents the earliest days of the space age.
right. But they've actually talked
It
about
was the
going to get it.
fourth object ever launched into space.
And
It's
there's
still
been
there.
recent discussion about going to get it because of its
Yes.
historical value.
Yes.
Oh, that's something. I'm surprised. How, okay, let me go back for a second. So,
Yep.
You're sort of a more traditional archaeologist. You get inspired to go into the space side of this stuff. How new is this field? Like, is this something other people are doing? Is this something you've
Yes.
sort of had to create yourself, or what? Where does it sort of stand?
I did not create this field. So the earliest, well, so I take a step way back, because I know, first of all, I understand that for some people it's a hurdle to think about doing archaeology on stuff that's so recent,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
right? Because the archeo, right?
Yeah.
Old.
Yeah.
So obviously archaeology is associated with the distant past.
Mm, mm.
Right. And I think people could probably understand, like, oh, if you could dig Civil War battlefields or things like that, so it's
Yeah.
175 years ago. Or you can talk about even like World War II battlefields, and people go looking for things like 80 years ago.
Mm.
But stuff more recent than that seems like it's too new, right?
Yeah.
But there actually has been a subfield of archaeology which we call contemporary archaeology that has existed since the 1970s. And the first real project in this area was what's called the Tucson Garbage Project, which was started by a University of Arizona professor named William Rathje. And what he did was he convinced the city of Tucson to bring him samples of trash every week to the parking lot behind the anthropology building. And he and
Oh,
his
they must
graduate
have loved
students
them.
went through and cataloged every item that was in the trash. And the reason for doing this was to kind of test the principle that archaeologists are able to understand and draw inferences from the material that they're studying that has some relation to what's really going on in that
Well,
society. So
and
if we study our
garbage.
own society that we supposedly understand, then maybe we'll say, okay, we can trust these ideas. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, because that's that. I mean, it's actually it's something that comes up over and over again in some of the articles you sent. Was the idea that garbage is the window into history? Like that's
It's the
if
quintessential archaeological
that's it
material.
is garbage. And then the issue we have with space is, as you say, we don't we don't if the space is either it's either the trash is either burned up or deorbited or
Goes in
or
the ocean,
yeah,
goes to the bottom of the ocean, right?
yeah.
Yeah, which is another issue that we could talk about, the environmental impact on the Earth. And how
Mm,
long can we keep throwing space stations into the ocean?
right.
But
Or into
but
orbit for that matter. Yeah.
right, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll leave that aside for the
Yeah.
moment. But you're right about the garbage thing, because Rafji actually started referring to himself as a garbologist. Um, but yeah, so what he discovered actually, because then he went out and he talked to the people whose garbage he had been going through,
Yeah.
and he started asking them about questions about what their daily lives, and he found that what they said about their daily lives was not the same as what they were throwing out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, he found that Latina mothers all universally said that they were making their babies' food from scratch, and yet those households were throwing out just as much of the kind of the jarred Gerber's baby food
Wow.
as any other household.
Right.
And that's not to say that they are bad parents or that they're liars or anything like that. That's completely to the side of what my point is. My
Mm-hmm.
point is that people often don't want to tell researchers things
Or
about
they
their
think it's
lives.
an exception in their own mind. They think that it's the Gerbers is an exception because I was having a bad day or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But they have a sense of their own cultural identity
Mm,
and how that's constructed. And one way it's that might be constructed in that culture is like making baby food from scratch and not buying
mm,
it at the store. And like that's fine,
yeah.
right? But what Rafchi showed then was that it's important to look at the material remains
Mm,
if you're talking about a contemporary society, because it might reveal something that the people you're studying wouldn't ordinarily tell you. And
right.
in terms of space, that's certainly true with the astronauts,
Mm,
because they are very well practiced at saying only what they want to say. In fact,
yeah.
that may be a large part of the reason why the individuals selected are selected, that they're very good at staying on
Yeah.
message,
Yeah.
right?
Incredibly well
And
trained for what they're going to communicate with the rest of the world. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. NASA holds that at the highest level. How are
Mm,
you telling the story of what we're doing?
mm,
And so they also are trying to preserve their way to get back to space, their next ride, if you will.
right.
So they're not
Right.
going to rock the boat by complaining about bad things in their mission,
Mm,
right? They're just going to put up with it. They saw what happened, for example, with the Skylab 4 crew. I don't know if you know about that, but Skylab being the first American space station in
mm,
the 1970s, and the Skylab 4 crew, which was the longest and the last of those crews, they felt like they were so overwhelmed by work that they went on strike for a day.
oh wow. I did not
And they
know
said,
this.
you are overburdening us, mission control. We need to take a break. We're going to take a break. And then they went back to work the next day. Well,
Wow.
what happened to those guys? Nothing publicly, but none of them ever went to space again.
Oy,
And
right. Of course.
every other astronaut saw that
Yeah. No,
and
we're
said,
good.
okay,
We're good. We're
I
fine.
learned.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
learned, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want to really know what's going on in a space habitat
Mm,
using the perspective of archaeology, which I'll also take a little bit of a step back to explain what I mean by that.
mm,
Archaeologists' key piece of evidence is what we call material culture.
mm,
And material culture just means, like all the stuff that we have around us, like
right. Right.
my phone, my glass of water, my
Right.
mouse, the laptop, all these things that we have around us, that we surround ourselves with, that we use, etc.
Right.
Everything
Right.
that's in this room that you can
Right.
see with me, right? All of that stuff, plus the room itself, plus the architecture, all of that
Mm,
is material culture. And so
right.
we use observations of the arrangement of that material culture, of its wear patterns, like how it was,
Mm,
what evidence there is for how it was used,
right.
those kinds of details, to reconstruct the society and all the values of that society, the interests of that society, the ideas about what was appropriate to put next to something else or to use in
Right.
concert with something else. That's so if that's what Rathje was thinking about, like
Right.
what is the material culture of these households? He's not seeing it in situ in their houses, but he's getting a sample of it anyway, right?
And
And he can say
asking them isn't
this
going to
goes,
work
and
because you
then
don't know. Yeah.
well, then he learned that by asking, right? So
Hmm.
so the point is with space habitats, if you want to learn what the crew is really doing, I mean, sure, they're watching them, they're under surveillance, the crew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There are video cameras and there's constant communication back and forth with the crew. But supposedly the cameras are turned off during non-working hours. The crew doesn't entirely believe this. We know that because we have anecdotal evidence that they turn the cameras away
Oh,
from
really?
from the field of
Interesting.
view when they're on break or like it's the weekend or something like that.
Mm.
Sorry, just a second. Then my dog, you can probably hear him. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. No, no worries. No, I got one too. They're very good at barking at all the wrong times. Yeah.
I knew he was going to do that. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's all right.
What kind of dog is
He's
he?
good. He's a little white terrier, right there on the
Oh,
couch.
very cute. A much
Yeah,
more sensible size than mine. Yes. Yeah.
yeah. No, definitely for apartment living, it's necessary.
Yeah.
So sorry about that, but
All right.
so yeah, so archaeology can reveal how people are actually using these spaces,
Mm.
even though they don't talk about it.
Right.
And also, we don't get to see how the crew is acting, right? Like, even if mission control sees it. And by the way, mission control, they're not like taking notes on what's happening every day.
Right. Right.
So we could talk about the project that I've been working on ISS,
Yeah.
if you want,
This was an eye
as
opener
as
for
a
me.
lead-in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point is that what we're doing is we're looking at the long term
Yeah.
of how people are using these spaces.
Mm.
So yeah,
Well, and it's I mean something else you pointed out, which I thought was fascinating, is if you're looking for reasons why to do this, it's not just an academic thing. We're talking about going on these long missions to Mars and beyond, and putting ourselves out there. And if we're not learning from the spaces that exist already, then we're just going to basically just keep repeating the mistakes. Yeah.
absolutely agreed, right? Like, so how are we going to take those next steps to really living in
Mm,
space
mm,
as opposed to surviving in space? That's a key element. So, you know, this project, so I've been kind of
yeah.
hinting at it,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
called the International Space Station Archaeological Project.
Yeah.
It started almost exactly 10 years ago in November of 2015. And it started really because I saw that NASA does not allow social scientists to apply to become
Mm,
astronauts.
right. Right. I love
And so,
that. No,
like,
thank you.
it explicitly stated that archaeologists could not become astronauts. And I saw that and I thought, what did an archaeologist ever do to NASA?
Yeah, yeah.
How
There's like
did
a
how did we
sign on
hurt
the
how did we
door
hurt
as you
them?
go in. Yeah.
How did we hurt them?
Yeah, yeah.
What did we do that they're so sure that they don't need us, right?
Mm, mm,
And I mean, look, it's long story short. I know it's just a sign of a kind of engineering mindset
mhm.
or bias. I would call it a bias
Yep.
that the social sciences are soft and squishy,
Right.
qualitative rather than quantitative, and we have bigger fish to fry,
Right.
right?
Right.
In terms of accomplishing our mission.
Right.
So I decided I would try and think about how I could show them what they were missing out on, or in a sense, showing them how much they still didn't know about what they didn't know
Right.
about what
Right.
they were trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started thinking about, like how could I do an archaeological project that would reveal this? And in addition, to go back a little bit to what we were talking about just a second ago, how can I help them
Right.
to
Right.
do these things better?
Right.
Right? But how can the social sciences contribute to improving the lives of future crews
Mm.
in space habitats? That's actually a fundamental goal of the ISS archaeological project.
Right.
Um,
But it's also a
so,
step, isn't it? It's like a step in space in space exploration too, right? Because it's like we used to be it was just utilitarian, and we designed for just the reasons that it needed to be there. This
yep,
to me, I feel, is like elevating the whole thing by saying like, no, we're now looking at this as a system of life and society like that. It seems like a jump to me.
absolutely. Life is not just about work and sleep
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
eating
Yeah.
and eating, right? Which is really all that the designers of ISS were thinking about.
Yeah. Our houses aren't just rooms that we sleep in or eat in or whatever, you know.
They didn't even really think about sleep, to be honest with you.
Yeah, or eating.
And eating, actually, you're absolutely right. Eating also got very short shrift. How do I know that? I know that because they didn't send up crew berths with the first US modules. Right? There were two. There were supposed to be three originally in one of the Russian modules. They only got two out of that. There were always at least three crew members until there was the Columbia accident. And then for brief periods, there were only two at a time. But then they gradually went up to six, and they had to figure out. There were plans for a habitation module. The habitation module got built and never sent up. It's sitting in Huntsville, Alabama, and is used for testing. It's not actually in space. So then they had to develop a new sleep system, which went into a workspace. So there's no divisions about that. And the eating side of things, the US side of the ISS has never had a professionally designed table. In fact, and it didn't have a table at all for the first almost 10 years of ISS. So
you mean
it was a secondhand table that came from the Russians. When the Russians brought up a new table for their own module, the old table got moved into the US, what's called Node 1 module, and that got used for 6 years. And then NASA has an outreach program with high school students, and high school students designed and built the table that is currently used in the US segment of the ISS.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a cool high school project.
Yeah, seriously.
But not a professionally designed table.
Yeah, it's almost like an afterthought.
It's 100% an afterthought. And then hygiene was even lower on the list. Yeah. There were no accommodations given whatsoever for the crew to wash themselves, clean themselves. So, and of course, there's no shower on ISS. But I mean, even beyond that, I'm talking about a space to do that in. The crew has kind of jury-rigged different modules where they can put up where there's enough room to kind of stretch out, and they can put a curtain up to get a modicum of privacy. But that's just on their own initiative. That is not something
never designed in.
Never. Wow. On the Russian side or the US side. So these are the things that are missing.
It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to, and then come home. Right.
Have fun for 6 months to a year. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is wild.
You'll do it because you're so driven to this mission, right? Yeah. To the desire for this experience of exploring and microgravity, whatever it is. You'll do it, and you won't complain. Right. And that's what happened. That's exactly what's happened. But we can do better.
Of course. Yeah.
By just thinking about these problems. But like, how do you know what the extent of the problem is until you actually examine them? And that's kind of the motivation behind,
and especially when the astronauts aren't complaining about it. When you can't get them to complain, then you're
Would you believe that there's actually something called the Crew Comments Database at Johnson Space Center, where they can actually register their issues or thoughts about things that work and things that don't work? Well, here's the thing: the only people who are allowed to look at it, to access it, are members of the astronaut office themselves.
Really?
So nobody who is in a position to make decisions or to design anything has seen any of those comments. Wow. And I've had it explained to me that, like, part of the reason for that is that, somebody might say something that they're really irritated by, but it might be a kind of overreaction. So we don't want an overreaction in the opposite direction by countering or responding to that. Okay, fine, but it's not a transparent situation, and it's not going to make anything better.
Yeah.
Nothing can possibly be made better under the current situation.
Well, and also knowing that you've got even if it's 6 months or even a year, there's an end to this. If you're looking at like longer missions, you got to sort that stuff out, right? I mean, because that's and privacy.
And so seeing that archaeologists and anthropologists are explicitly not permitted to become astronauts is a clear sign that NASA neither understands nor cares about the social and cultural aspects of life in space, which are fundamental and which were recognized actually literally in 1972. There was a National Academies of Science report called Human Factors in Long Duration Spaceflight, and it says that a crewed spacecraft is a micro society in a mini world.
Yes, I quoted that. And actually, I love that. Yeah,
this is like the fundamental phrase.
Yeah.
That underlies everything we do. We want to understand that micro society and that mini world, right?
And look at us. I mean, you don't think the astronauts have rooms full of stuff? You don't think that the people who are making these engineering decisions don't have things around them, cultural things? I mean, the fact is that it is a part of stuff. You may not want it to be, but it's that weird disconnect between the science and the brain, the squishy stuff, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we're way more quantitative than you might think we are.
Oh, really?
We deal with big data in a very serious way. The site that I work on in Spain, we have 1 million pieces of pottery. We have to handle that data, right?
Yeah.
Like that's quantitative stuff. So we're used to dealing with that. There's this sort of misconception about what kinds of information we can provide and what it's based on.
Well, and you're doing like open source intelligence gathering, aren't you? You're like basically putting together all the information you can from what they allow the world to see, basically, right?
I should put OSINT in my
you should totally, because it's absolutely, it's open source intelligence gathering. It's like if you're using photographs and posts and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Right. So this is the point, right? That you might then be asking, like, what is your evidence?
Right.
You can't. You obviously can't go to the space station, and that's true. I can't.
Right.
And on some level, I'm probably too scared to. But
yeah. I don't just play a coward on television. I'm happy here on Earth. So yeah.
I have fear of missing out on the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But the question is, like, how do you access that material culture if you can't go there? Like, they've already told you can't be a professional astronaut, and I don't have $70 million to pay like Axiom for a 2-week trip to go there. How do I do this? Well, so your point about the photos, that was exactly that. I realized at that same time, because I had a colleague who published a fabulous book. His name is Jason DeLeon. He teaches at UCLA, and he wrote a book called The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail, which was another example of contemporary archaeology that used anthropological and archaeological techniques to understand the lived experience of migrants crossing the border from Mexico into the US.
Oh my God.
And one of the many creative things that Jason did was he gave disposable cameras to the migrants on the Mexico side of the border, and he retrieved those cameras once they got to the US so that they could take photos of things they encountered, obstacles, et cetera, the landscape, so that he could see what he otherwise was unable to observe. And I thought, like, another light bulb moment. I can use photography.
Yeah.
To the extent that I can look at photos of the inside of the space station, and I can say who is in this photo and where are they located in the space station and what material culture are they associated with in each of those images. Plus, all of those images are born digital because the habitation of ISS in November of 2000 coincided with the rise of digital photography as a consumer technology. So there are many orders of magnitude more images of life on the ISS than any previous space mission.
Right.
They also have the metadata that tells me the time and the date that they were made.
Oh, sweet.
So I can put them in chronological order and start to track change over time, which is something archaeologists love to do.
That's got to be a lot of photos.
There are millions of photographs, but of the ones that are available to me, we probably have somewhere on the order of 25,000.
Wow. That's a lot. So, it's still a lot to wade through looking for.
It is, absolutely. So there's the ones that are publicly available on NASA's Flickr site, and that's of the interior. There's probably about 10 or 12,000 of those. And then we for a while, we had an agreement with NASA where they were providing us unpublished images. So we have for the first 18 expeditions, which is like the first 8 years. We have a whole bunch more, like another 10,000, 15,000 more of those images. So that's our original data source, and we want to capture, like I said, who, what, where, at that moment in time. And we did a pilot study of this, and we were able to look at an area in the Russian module called Zvezda.
Yeah.
And I actually, do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah. Can you share it? Is that?
I can, absolutely. Okay. I have that ready. Just give me a second to pull it up and.
It's just such a shift of thinking. It's a subtle shift, but it's a huge one in a way that of looking at this stuff differently. You are going to add that to the scene. There we go.
Everybody can see that now?
Look at that. How's that? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can you see my cursor as well?
I can see. Yes.
Okay, great. So here what you're looking at is a photograph that was taken in, I think it was 2009, in this Russian module. And we can always tell the Russian modules because they have this distinctive beige fabric surface, which is very different from the US. So I talk about space cultures and different engineering cultures. Like this is actually a treatment of the interior that goes back to the original Soyuz capsules in the 60s and was designed by a female designer, Galina Balashkova. She really was the one who was like, the crew needs to orient themselves. So we'll give them beige fabric walls, and then you can't see the quote unquote floor in this image, but it's an olive green plastic. So that helps the crew to kind of orient themselves, to give themselves a common orientation. It's not a real up or down, but it allows them to recognize the space more easily. So this is good. This is typical Russian. If you look at the US modules, they're this white plastic with maybe some blue or like a kind of salmon colored plastic accent. Very, very different and very kind of hard and well, artificial kind of surface as opposed to this, which feels a little more natural. But I noticed
in a kind
when
of
I saw this
photo way,
100%. So I noticed for the when I first saw this image, all of this stuff on the wall behind me. Like on the one hand, so you've got a Japanese crew member, you've got an American, a NASA astronaut, and actually a Hungarian-American space tourist. These two guys had just arrived. None of them are Russian, so this is a kind of a sign of the international nature of the space station, that they're in this Russian area, but none of them are Russian. And then there's all this other stuff on the walls, and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. What have we got here? We've got a flag and mission patches. So that's very spacey, but we also have things like a gold cross.
I know, that seems so weird to see.
Yeah, from an American or Western perspective, definitely, right? So we have Orthodox icons. These are real paintings. Here. There's actually one behind this guy's head here. There's a fourth one up on the wall here. Over it. This is a crew berth. This is one crew berth. This is the other crew berth in the Russian module with the door open. This one's closed. And then we have other things up here, like we actually have a painting, a little small painting that's actually of the most important church in Russia, and a small landscape painting here. Like I can actually zoom in. A small landscape painting here. And then we have photographs, and you might recognize this guy, who's super famous, obviously, Yuri Gagarin. And this is actually a very famous image of him. You can't see what he's in his military uniform, but he's holding a dove. That was given to him by the Bulgarian young pioneers when he visited them a month after his space flight. So this is a super famous flight of him in his military uniform, but with the symbol of peace. And then two photographs that are actually of the same person. That's Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who was the Russian theorist around the turn of the 20th century, who came up with the idea of multi-stage rockets as the way to get off of the Earth and into space, and also was the first person to theorize about what life would be like in microgravity. And so these are Russian Soviet space heroes who are up here, right? So that's kind of interesting that they're there. And then we have a plastic kind of space shuttle toy up there, pens on the wall, and also then there's another toy. There's like a polar bear, and there's a giraffe in here, and another uniform, and then we've got food down here. This is like dried. I don't know, some sort of dried fruit and Huggy wipes. You know, like all of this is the material culture of the space station. A laptop. There's a camera floating up here. Another laptop.
I know. I love it. Just floating around.
Yeah. So I started to think, is that stuff always there? And so I started looking at this for photos of this exact location, and I found about 45 of them covering a period of 2000 to 2014 where there were changes. Because there was always stuff up on this wall, and there still is stuff up on this wall 10 years after that. In fact, this photograph of Yuri Gagarin is the one item that has always been on the wall since it first appeared in 2002.
Wow!
So he's like he's like the secular hero saint that is watching over the crew, right? And the others change. I mean, Tsiolkovsky is often there. There's often at least one icon here. The cross is pretty common. Sometimes you'll see
no band albums, or there's no musical.
No, that's really interesting, right? But so on the one hand, I do think of this as being kind of like the refrigerator door, where it's like they have constructed an identity. But I do agree with you that it lacks personalization, and so this is like it's a group thing. right? For all the Russian crew that are there. They're also probably pretty conscious of the fact that this is one of their prime locations for doing video conferences back home.
Oh, right.
And so they're purposely saying, like, this is who we are.
Right. So you don't want Duran in the background with the,
This is what it means to be a cosmonaut, to be a
Right.
Russian, Russian in space.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's that weird work-life balance thing again, right? That's not happening because it's all work. Yeah.
Yeah, because they step out of here and they're suddenly in work.
Yeah.
Right. So what we were able to show was that the religious items in particular, they change over time. Sometimes there's a more religious crew or a less religious crew. A lot of these guys grew up under communism, so they were raised atheist. So some of them are not that religious, although the Orthodox Church has become a major component of the Putin version of Russia.
Funny how that happens.
But many of them are quite religious and quite patriotic as well. And so they are either taking up their own icons, or sometimes the Russian Space Agency is sending icons up with them. There are news releases about this, so we can tell what the difference is. What we discovered is that the number of religious items relative to the secular items, that proportion changes. It grows substantially at moments of patriotism back on Earth, or so like the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II in 2005, the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, or the build up to the Russian initial invasion of Ukraine in 2014. There were spikes
in the amount of religious icon. Yeah, well, that's war and religion. They love,
and nationalism, nationalism, right? Yeah. So that was the first time. It was kind of our pilot where we were like, here's what looking at the material culture of the space station can tell you. We even identified, I don't have a picture of this handy at the moment, but in 2021, we identified that a Russian cosmonaut had placed an icon over his door that was the patron saint of the Russian nuclear Air Force group.
A patron saint? Wow.
And he also was the founder of the city of Sevastopol in Crimea, which is where this cosmonaut was from. Oh, wow. And so he was purposely displaying that over his birth door, saying, like, I'm Russian, I'm from Crimea. This guy founded it. Crimea is Russian, not Ukrainian. Like that, he was clearly making a statement in that regard. Yeah. He had made posts on Twitter about how great it was that the bridge was being built from Russia to Crimea, things like that he could see it being built from space in a previous mission. But I guarantee that not even the other crew, the non-Russian crew, would have understood the message of that object.
Right.
A Russian audience would have understood instantly.
Right.
But and I'm sure NASA had no idea that this was on display. Yeah. Not that they could do anything about it if they wanted to, but that this is that
they could put pressure.
Contemporary geopolitics. No, that would never happen.
Oh,
that
really?
would never happen. And the Russians in this situation would never respond to it because they would be like, yeah, we want this to happen.
Yeah.
So,
of course.
But just being aware of what's going on in the space, that contemporary geopolitics actually does affect what's going on the space station. Yeah. Who knew?
How could it not?
Right?
In a way, I mean, but
so how is this affecting the relationships of the crew members as well? Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That's something we don't get a good window on.
Religious
we can see,
or political or
eating around the same table, because in fact we know that every Friday night they have a group meal with all of the crew at once, either in the Russian segment or in the US segment, and otherwise, actually, they don't see each other that frequently because they're working on different things, and the space station is really big now.
Right.
So
how big
for the last,
it now? What's I don't have a sense of.
There's like 13 modules, something like that. Its footprint. NASA loves to put it over a football field and say like it's the same with the solar arrays and everything.
Right.
But it has about 1,000 cubic meters of habitable space and is usually described as being equivalent to like a 5-bedroom house.
Wow.
Except that you can use all of it.
Right.
you can use,
and it's still not big enough
on the floor.
If people are putting up things about invasion of Ukraine and stuff.
And then on the U.S. side, we don't have those displays because, especially the religious displays, because that's U.S. federal government property, and it would be illegal to display religious items. So, and not only that, but NASA is so risk averse when it comes to personal expression that the most you ever see is like sports affiliations,
right?
including what team a crew member roots for,
Right.
that's okay.
Because that's benign enough that they can,
Or even to the extent of like if one of them went to a military academy, like go Army beat Navy kind of thing, you'll see
Right.
that because it's like that's in good fun.
But you're
Even
not
though
seeing any subtle. There's no. You haven't seen any sort of subtle American propaganda approaches or anything. Or?
The only thing, and I do not have an image readily available. The only thing we saw was there was a crew created memorial that was on the hatch of Node 1 going into the airlock, where there were photographs of deceased colleagues.
Oh.
And other items belonging to those colleagues, like a patch from a uniform that had the person's name, or a nameplate. There's actually a nameplate from somebody's office door, presumably at JSC, that they brought up. An astronaut who actually never flew, but who was memorialized by his friends in having that object brought to ISS and placed on that door. The other thing we know is that NASA actually tells the crew to sanitize those locations. I mean, they really are risk averse. They do not want any controversy. They don't want some congressman saying, like, I don't agree with what's going on up there. This doesn't reflect my views of taxpayer money. And, yeah, exactly, 100%. So they're like, dude, take those things down if you're going to show photographs or if you're going to make photographs or video in those areas. So the crew really doesn't. It took. We didn't know about any displays until 2019.
Wow.
So on the U.S. side.
And they're still. I mean, and going forward, you've only got a few more years left, right? Are there any new plans to continue this?
To continue our study?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a couple of initiatives I'm working on. So we've done a couple of different things. We've observed cargo coming back from the space station because it's the only material culture we can actually interface with on Earth. The way
actually get to have a look at it? Have you been able to get?
I did, yeah.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't take it to a lab and study it. I watched the process of its return and how it was handled as a kind of a proxy for understanding what it meant up in space. And that what we learned from that really was not about the objects themselves or their materials so much, but about their overall meaning and importance within the larger project of ISS. That the crew's lives are completely governed by lists of items and by procedures that have to be followed in order to make sure that everything's done properly. And the way certain items are handled differently from others. So, like, trash does not get brought back. The only things that do get brought back are broken equipment, scientific samples, and crew personal items. And the crew personal items will fit in a shoebox for each one. That's all they get. But the way those things are handled, especially the scientific samples, particularly if they're crew samples like blood, for example, they're handled with the utmost of privacy. The same with the crew personal items. Nobody is allowed to see them or know what they are. Right? There's a whole kind of apparatus around taking care of those things and the chain of custody, which really sets those things apart from the things that are not considered important. Right? So that's how looking at the difference between trash and the cargo that costs so much and has so much procedure behind it to bring it back to Earth. That's where we identify the difference. So that was interesting.
And they have there's no lists of what those items are. I would have thought they would have known.
Not everything. Public. We were given them for those missions. We were able to analyze those lists for those missions, but not publish them. So we could talk about the categories of the items and what percentage or proportion they fell into.
Any surprises? Anything that you were like, whoa, really? No baby food or anything that, any...
There was a lot. One of the categories that was quite large for this one of the two missions that we observed was kind of what you call PR stuff. So it was items that had been brought to space, a lot of medallions and flags and things like that had been brought to space as part of a mission by a European astronaut, Paolo Nespoli. He had already come back to Earth, but these objects hadn't been brought back yet. And the only point of their existence and they're being sent to ISS was so that they could be distributed to people as gifts. Like political figures in Italy. These kinds of, here's something that was
in space.
Exactly. Space flow nature of it. And there was a high number of those, even though they occupied a small amount of space because of the kinds of things they were. Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, there were two items that were really interesting in that cargo. One was an espresso maker that the Italian Space Agency had designed
Really?
as an expression of Italian culture in space. It was designed to work in space by Lavazza,
Oh, wow.
and
And it
it was
worked?
called and it was called ISS Espresso
Why did they send it
um,
back?
because they had run out of the pods.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Story of my life.
And I'm sure what they
Yeah.
I'm sure what they had wanted to do was put it in a museum on display, like look at Italian
Right.
culture and technology.
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure where the ISS Espresso is right now, but I'm sure it's somewhere in
I
Italy.
would just think you'd want a good espresso on
Well,
the
they drink a
space
lot of coffee. They drink a
Yeah,
lot of coffee,
yeah.
but it was not a proper espresso.
Oh, okay.
And so when a couple of times when different Italian crew members were up there, they would ship up pods, and then
Right.
when they ran out, they were like, okay, we're not going to keep doing that. But
Right.
that was one item. And the other was the Robonaut, which was a General Motors designed humanoid robot, which broke while it was in space. So
Not the floating one, not the little floating one. That was
no,
a
it
humanoid,
actually
no.
it's basically like a torso with arms and a head,
Right.
like a
Okay.
human. It doesn't have legs. But anyway,
I feel like that's just that never turns out well in films.
Well, this is what's funny. They switched it off while it was holding on to a handrail. And so they actually had to they couldn't get the hand off, so they had to unbolt the handrail and send the arm with the handrail back to her.
Yeah. I had nothing creepy about that. Here's your hand back. And that was just and that came back because it's tested.
They had to fix it. They had to fix the broken equipment. They had to figure out what was wrong with it and fix it, and either decide whether to send it back or to design a whole new one. Right. I don't know what. I don't think they've sent a new one. So, but to get back to your original question, which was what we want to do in the future, I was just giving an example of something else we had actually done. We also had an experiment on ISS where we had the crew document locations.
Oh yeah.
And that was the first time that archaeology had ever been done off of the Earth. I'll come back to that, but I don't want to forget your question. So, trash. Speaking of trash, I want to get ISS trash.
Yeah.
I actually want to get ISS trash. It's a difficult argument to make because you're competing with everybody else who wants to bring back something. And the only capsule, the only vehicle that brings anything back from ISS is Cargo Dragon. Now, we don't have shuttle. We haven't had shuttle for 15 years.
I know.
So we're much more limited on what we can bring back. But I want to get trash, and I want to study it from the entity level, individual items, down to the molecular level to understand what is considered trash, what state it's in, what characteristics it has, what it's made of. Which, I mean, I do know that they know what these things are made of, but it takes a month or two for a supply craft, which is used to throw away the trash, to come, and then they have to load it, and then it goes and it burns up in the atmosphere. That's how they get rid of trash, right? So that trash is sitting there. It's sitting there on board, stinking and rotting if it's food. There's old clothes in it and stuff like that. I know, in broad terms, we know what it is, but there's also like plastics and metals and what is happening to that in the space environment. The reason being, the motivation for this is, if you know what it is and what state it's in, you can figure out what you can do with it. To go back to that idea of the in situ resource we were talking about before, it costs
sustainability standpoint. Yeah,
it costs tens of millions of dollars plus the environmental costs to launch, needed supplies to the space station. How much more difficult is that going to be if you're talking about a lunar habitat, or if you've got an unresupplyable Martian mission? You want to know what you can do with these things. But my argument is nobody has ever studied the trash from a space habitat before, from any field, ever. And you should want to know the kinds of things that we're going to look at as archaeologists, but also material scientist collaborator, what it is and what could be done with it.
Yeah.
And you will cut your costs significantly, and you will make life more sustainable. Right. The rocket launches themselves do damage to the environment. How can we minimize those? These kinds of things. Right. So I'm working with NASA folks who work on logistics reduction, who work on waste management. We're trying to see how we can make an argument that NASA returns 1 or 2 samples of this from ISS before it goes away.
Is there a way to somehow reduce it? I mean, could you take photos and then just take a sample of things, or could you grind it up and just have like fragments of it so you get a sense of it or something? I mean, is there a way to
I
keep
don't
the
think they want
cost?
fragments of anything floating around.
No, of course
Fragments
not.
fragments are a hazard,
Of
for
course.
example, for inhalation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that probably, but I actually do. I think it's worth looking at the stuff,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? It's
The actual
worth,
physical looking at the yeah, okay. Right.
yeah. So in an ideal world, we do want all of it. We want
Mm,
whatever they will give us. The NASA folks said, well, what if we give you stuff that had been used in an analog experiment, where people have, basically pretended to be in space and
right.
tried to, like, they've cordoned themselves off for 2 or 3 months a year, whatever. Would you be interested in that? It's like, yeah, but the environment of ISS is quite different.
Mm, yeah.
The
And it's a
climate of
different
it,
culture and a
the
different culture. Yeah.
microgravity, like the microorganisms that are living
Mm,
there,
mm.
the exact kinds of things that are being used up there and how long they're being used. If we have that, why don't we look at the real thing?
Right, right.
Right? That's my response. So
Do you know
I'm
what it
pushing on
costs?
that.
Like, what does it cost what it cost to bring back? I don't know. What would you bring a month back or a week's back, or what would you be looking for?
I guess you could say it's a percentage of the 50-70 million dollars that it costs to launch and return the vehicle,
Mm,
whatever that is. Generally speaking, when you do science on ISS,
mm,
the thing that you don't pay for is launch of materials that you
mm,
need for that, or return of items like the scientific samples.
mm.
That stuff is kind of covered by
Right,
NASA.
right.
Um, and also for the crew time. You don't pay for the crew time.
So it's just a
If you so
priority then,
you you
basically.
you apply to do research, and if you're chosen, that's what they're giving you. You have to figure out how to pay for the other stuff, like the scientific analysis of it, the transport of it, the care of
Right,
it,
right.
the time of writing the procedures for it, all that stuff. You have to budget for that.
Mm.
But what you don't pay for is launch and return and the crew time.
Do you know
So
what's leaving garbage wise? I mean, do you know? Is that documented in some way? You have no
not publicly, not
really,
publicly.
because even
Yeah,
even just knowing that would be helpful, at least to
it
start.
would. Yeah, absolutely.
And why are they so? What are they worried about? Again, looking inefficient or something, or what's the?
Well, I mean, it's from on face value saying I want to bring trash back. Well, why do you want to bring that when you can bring other things that are more like
Right.
if it's a zero sum game, which I don't know how much of a zero sum game it is,
Mm,
but if
mm,
it is a zero sum game, then you are competing against some other list of
mm,
priorities.
mm.
That's
Wow.
the issue, right? But I do think that the outcome of this research could be profound for
Mm-hmm.
sustaining future operations. Like,
Yeah.
this is, I know, like, I'm an archaeologist, and it's a crazy thing to say I'm an archaeologist who's studying this and I can help you. Like,
Mm, mm,
that seems like it's a hard thing, obstacle for people to get their minds past
mm. Yeah, you almost want to sort of
the way
team up.
business as usual works.
You almost want to team up with a group that's looking at 3D printing in space or something, so you could reuse the material or something there.
Yeah, that's fair, and to the extent that, like, NASA's Human Research Program absolutely refuses to fund social science research, because I've asked them, and
Mm,
their response was, if you piggybacked on some other research, maybe we could do something.
right.
But then I have to
On
make a
the
case to
real
these other people.
scientists.
100%. And so this is exactly why I kind of
Yeah.
want to avoid that.
Yeah.
I refuse to accept that what I'm doing is not real science.
Right. Right. Yeah. You want to
And
establish it so it
on some
becomes a
hand, it has
priority.
to be legitimized. And
Yeah.
not only that, but we actually have done research on ISS,
Mm, mm,
right? We did actually convince somebody briefly
mm.
in a miracle, to give us that opportunity,
And
and
that was the
we've done it.
photographs. That's the
This was the experiment that we did in 2022. So I can explain
right.
about that. So essentially, we had a list of 7 experiments that we were
Mm,
interested in doing. We wanted to sample surfaces to see what material was building up, like a kind of soil on the surfaces of
right.
ISS with a cotton swab,
Oh
and have that
wow.
returned, so it could tell us what kind of cultural material was being used in that space.
Right.
We wanted to pull out an experimental rack, and see, like, what might be caught behind it. That was
Oh
because
neat.
people have found socks back there, believe it or not.
Well, they're floating around. What do you?
Yeah, it's like your laundry, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but like, that would be our equivalent of excavating. We would
Right.
pull out this rack, and we would see
Right.
what's underneath it,
Right.
so to speak, underneath. But we have been talking to what's called the ISS National Laboratory,
Mm,
which is based at Kennedy in Florida, and they are the ones who manage all the external research on
right.
ISS, the
Right.
non-space agency research especially for US
Right.
type stuff. They're interested in commercialization of technologies that, they're kind of, that's their job. They're also interested in the natural sciences, the physical sciences,
Right.
and not the social sciences. It's the same story
Oh.
everywhere. Same story everywhere.
Okay.
It's not in their kind of their charter, but they have access to half of the crew's time, and they can launch things and they can return things for you if that's what you need.
Right.
So you can apply through this system that they have and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And at the same time, when we started talking to them in 2018, said these are experiments we want to do, the people who were in charge were kind of like, well, we can't do that because that's not what we do. Like, again, it's not in our kind of mission statement.
Right.
But it's interesting, and if it can help future space life, living in space better, that actually would be kind of valuable. Why don't you write us an unsolicited proposal and tell us what you'd like to do? So we wrote an unsolicited proposal. This was outside of the system.
So they asked you for an unsolicited. Nice.
Right.
Okay.
So ordinarily there are these opportunities that you apply for the chance to do what you want to do.
Right.
And either you're selected or not selected. So this was outside of those opportunities. We wrote it and we had the 7 things and they're like, well, you can't do that because of this. You can't do that because of this, but these you can do. These are feasible. When you get money, come back to us and then we'll talk. And so then the question was like, can we get money from like the National Science Foundation or something like that? And we worked on that for several years. And then in 2021, one of the guys there, out of the blue, kind of wrote me and said, those experiments you were talking about doing, we actually are foreseeing an excess of crew time because there are now 7 permanent crew members rather than 6.
Yeah.
And also some of the sponsor projects from our opportunities, they're actually delayed, so they're not going to be able to use the time that we originally had scheduled for them. So you've got excess crew time. Is there anything that you could propose that would not require sending anything to the space station? And we said, yes. There is. My collaborator, Alice Gorman, who teaches at Flinders University in Australia, Dr. Space Junk, had this idea.
She's Dr. Space Junk? That's what? Really?
That's her nickname.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. Because she originally started doing orbital stuff.
Right.
And now I'm realizing I didn't really answer your question about when space archaeology started. It started in the 90s. Yeah. And Alice was an early. She was in there 2000, 2001, something like that, thinking about these issues. Anyway, she had this idea. So I was a latecomer in 2008, but she had this idea that we would just take photographs. We would mark off parts of the space station, squares, like we have squares or trenches in the ground. This is absolutely analogous to how we do archaeological work. What do they call it?
Quadrant? So it's
trenches. We just call them trenches.
Oh, trenches. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they're not always square. They're often square, but
fair enough.
Yeah. But the idea was based on, like if you went to a site and you didn't know what you were going to find, you could put out a grid of 1 meter squares and choose some of those squares to dig, and 1 meter square because it's fast, you can dig those quickly. And that would give you a quick picture of what you were likely to find over the whole site, and you could strategize from that point on.
Right.
And we call these shovel test pits. That's the archaeological term for these 1 meter squares. So she said, let's do shovel test pits on the walls of ISS. We mark out spaces in different modules, and we'll have the crew take a photograph of them each day for 60 days. And each photograph will be the equivalent of a layer of soil that we're removing in our trench that represents a period of time, a concrete period of time. And the objects that we find in there, in that layer, all go together. They're all linked to each other chronologically, and therefore they have meaning together as well as separately.
Right.
So what does each of those photographs, or contexts as we call them, what does each of those contexts tell us about what's going on in this location?
Wow.
And we said all we need for that are adhesive tape, a ruler for scale, a color calibration card so that we can fix the photos, a camera and a lens.
Right.
If all of those things are on ISS, we've got that.
Yeah.
And he wrote back a week later. He's like, they have it. We can give you the crew time.
Wow.
So
it's not a lot of crew time, right? I mean, I guess you got
15 minutes. 15 minutes a day. Yeah, a couple hours to set it up.
Yeah.
And 15 minutes a day for 60 days.
That's amazing.
So so they gave us the opportunity, and in January of 2022 we started. And we had 60 consecutive days of photographs.
How do you select what portion to look at? Is it what's available, or what they'll let you look at, or what got you the specific
They didn't.
places.
They didn't say that there was anything that was not fair game. Except we did ask to put squares in the Russian segment, and they said that's a non-starter. They'll never. We can ask them, but they'll just say no. We know
Right,
that they'll
okay.
say no.
Right.
So we did. So unfortunately, all of the squares were in the U.S. segment, but we got them in 6 different modules.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to cover as many different kinds of activities as possible: science, exercise, hygiene, office work, maintenance, those kinds of things. And we're operating on the idea that how these places are defined is how they're being used.
Right.
That the thing, but we're also testing that hypothesis, because what we're going to show is, were they used that way or were they not used that way?
Right.
And so that we tried to kind of have a range. And there were some areas, like we had a square in the Japanese lab where they said, we know what's going on in there, and there's really not going to be any activity in that particular rack.
Yeah.
Are you sure that that's what you want? Are you sure that you want to take, like, you're only getting this opportunity? Are you sure you want to document?
We can find you a better section. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, whatever better means, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Better. What does better? What does better mean to them? They're not archaeologists, right?
Yeah.
So our response was, actually, we would like to know the difference between a low activity area and a high activity area.
Right. Yeah.
That we know nobody's ever done that. So that's a very low bar. Like, what's the difference between low and high activity? But we'll actually be able to, if you're right, we'll actually be able to say that. And then on the other hand, what if it turns out that the crew is using that space for something you're not thinking about?
Yeah.
That's not an official
surprises like that
activity. It doesn't seem so in that area, but it's currently being documented, so I can't give you a categorical answer on that. In the European lab, it seemed similarly that there wasn't necessarily going to be a lot of activity, but it was adjacent to a plant habitat that was very active and had this amazing purple light that was often on.
I think I've seen a photo. Yeah, an amazing looking thing. Yeah,
because that's the light frequency that plants grow best.
Right, of course. Yeah.
So there was that, but then it turned out in those photos, there's a lot of audio-visual equipment. There are microphones, there's a video camera, there's headsets, and like a lavalier mic and a handheld mic. And it's like, oh, this is telling us that this place is actually multi-purpose. Right. It's not just used for science, it's also used for video conferences.
Right.
It
looks nice with a few plants in the background.
So but how is that being accommodated by the design of this module? Right.
Probably not.
And I could. It's not at all. And so if I could take it back to one that we really have fully documented and analyzed, the maintenance work area in what's called Node 2, which I'll show you a photo of that.
Yeah. This is the one you showed us before. Is that
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great.
So I'm going to share my screen.
I think I have to say yes when it pops up, so I'll get ready.
Oops, hold on, wrong one.
All good.
There we go. Okay, allow.
And adding to the scene. There we go. I should double check, make sure Agnes not got questions for me too.
Okay.
Oh wow.
And so this is the maintenance work area. There's a crew berth over here on the right, but you can see all of these Velcro squares, which are used to mimic gravity, or what Alice calls gravity surrogates.
Right.
This is a place where maintenance is supposed to happen, but also sometimes science. So what's actually happening here? Here you can see the yellow bits of tape that were used to mark the boundaries of our square.
Those are your boundaries. Those are your
Right. The crew put that up there for us, and all we are interested in is what's inside that boundary.
Right.
So we're identifying each object and its location in each of the 60 photographs for this square. And we actually had 3,608 instances of objects over that 2-month period in this square. So there's all kinds of things activity here. Yes, that's definitely high activity. It was moving around a lot too, certainly compared to the others. But what we actually found is that the space is really being used, not so much, never for maintenance, in fact, that we could identify, and only on 4 or 5 days for science. Right. Instead, it was being used for storing these items because there was so much Velcro here. It kind of, you can think of it as the black hole, the gravity well that's sucking all of these items to it, because there's no better place to put them. Wow. This place is handy, like the pegboard in your garage or your garden shed. It's the place where you put things and maybe you forget about them.
Yeah.
You're just like, I need a place for this.
It's both physical Velcro and and like almost cultural Velcro as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
sucking up all the
100%.
stuff. Yeah, or
So what does that mean? It means that if you're designing a maintenance work area for a future space station, maybe you need to provide better storage
Yeah,
in this area,
we need more.
right?
Send
Or
more
more
Velcro.
storage elsewhere so
Yeah,
that this is used exclusively for the purpose that you really want it used for.
right, right.
This is what I'm talking about, where we are able to identify um, disjunctures
Mm,
between how something is planned or intended to be used and how it's actually being used.
mm,
And that's where the value added of this. And so we're talking to all of these space station companies that are designing the replacements for ISS, saying you need to think about these issues
right, right.
when you're creating this, or else you're going to have inefficiencies, you're going to have problems.
Well, yeah, and if they're worried about trying to, like, I mean, even just that you could just completely change the design and make it much more useful for them if that's how they're going to. Now that you know that's how they're using it,
Absolutely.
God, it makes me want to organize
So
my desk.
this is not how this room normally looks. I want to
Yeah.
be clear. This
Oh,
is
really?
a lot cleaner than.
Is it really? You cleaned up? Oh, look, I'm in a
Yes.
closet, so I got nothing. I got nothing to worry about. You know, you don't want to go out there. This, 3D printers and pieces and everything. So yeah.
Right. We're sanitizing the area so that the public doesn't judge us poorly.
Which is exactly, I guess, which is what's happening in the space station as well, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I love it. We're basically just as an example. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Look, what happens on Earth absolutely happens on space. If you
Yeah.
find it on Earth, you're going to find it in space. Where humans are,
Yeah.
they're going to human.
Yeah.
So
I love this. I love it. And yet it's not a real science. So,
obviously,
it's extraordinary.
you can't learn anything from this.
Yeah, it's amazing because I do feel like once this becomes better accepted and becomes more of an integrated part of this stuff, we will have transcended that first stage of man in space or humans in space. We're truly studying it as a civilization as opposed to as just a science experiment. Basically, I think it's amazing.
And I want to be clear that this is only an example. Like, this project is only an example. I really want, hopefully there are a lot of space people who are watching this. I really would love for them to think about how social science research and humanistic research and even the arts can actually help them think differently and better about how they're trying to achieve their goals. Believe it or not, like, you might say, like, that's not true. But you are going to come up with suboptimal solutions if you ignore these aspects of what it means to be human. And it's not just that. I could even take it a step further. Whatever technical, scientific project you might be working on, there are actually political, social, cultural dimensions to that, even if you don't want to
why not?
recognize it. And we can help you deal with that. Gesundheit.
I was going to sneeze, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Now I will. Excuse me. It's too long in the little closet, I guess. Yeah, I think you've actually got. I think you're talking to the right kind of crowd, because I do feel like this is stuff that, look, one of the things I think people love about science fiction is that it mixes the two, right? It mixes that sort of speculative science with
definitely
characters and people and societies, and so I think that in a way the science fiction crowd is the perfect crowd for this, because it's and we're sort of used to getting that in a fictional way. Now we can actually be getting it in an actual legitimate, sort of scientific approach to it.
I'm gonna shill. By the way, this is the consultancy that I've started with a friend who's a space architect.
Oh, great! Brick Moon.
Yes,
You're
and the whole point. Brick Moon, making worlds better is what it says. But yeah, so brickmoonspace.com. Yeah, so we're actually the purpose of this consultancy is to bring these ideas to companies that are trying to figure out how to live in space. The Star Labs, the Axioms, the Vasts, etc. All the Blue Origin.
Could we visit that site and have a look? Is there information for the general public type thing there?
Yeah, there's just a splash page. It's not anything highly developed, but yeah, brickmoonspace.com.
Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. That's great.
So yeah,
I have some questions. Are you?
I bet.
Yeah, there's a few. Well, I have questions.
This is not normal stuff. I anticipate that people will have lots of questions.
And of course, I've now just for some reason lost it. Hang on a second here. I'm just going to pull it up. This is amazing. I don't even know how to like.
You're very kind. Thank you.
What have I done to it? No, sorry. I thought I had it. One second here. There we go. Agony questions. Okay, so wholesome vampire is a regular for us. Should we have?
We like the wholesome ones.
Yeah, exactly. Those unwholesome. Yeah, the last thing you want. Should we have UNESCO heritage in space?
Yeah, so UNESCO, which
UNESCO.
is UNESCO, yeah, which is the United Nations, what is it? The Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization,
Okay.
is the arm of the UN that deals with cultural heritage,
Mm.
and I absolutely think that they should have a role in dealing with heritage in space. Again, I don't see that. I don't see a distinction between space heritage and terrestrial heritage. It's just that the legal structures treat space differently. And so, in fact, actually, several of the treaties that I referred to earlier that handle the concept of heritage and the protection of heritage in
Right.
international territories were under the aegis of UNESCO.
Right.
So the World Heritage Convention, for example, or there's actually a specific UNESCO. It's the most recent one, actually, a cultural heritage under the sea treaty,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is very similar to
Yeah.
space, and it
There you
says
go.
like if something has been in a location for 100 years, it is automatically heritage. Well, you could also say that things that are particularly important are heritage. It's also the one that says if something's in situ and is not threatened, you should leave it there, because
Right.
that's a best practice that has developed since the 1970s. So that absolutely the UN between the Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOSA as it's known, and the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UNCOPUOS, and UNESCO. Those are the three organizations that I think need to find a kind of a nexus. And
Are
I'm
you
part of
communicating with them? Is that
well, I'm part of a group. So there's an NGO called ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, based in Paris, which is also where UNESCO is based, which is the kind of leading organization on non-movable heritage.
Huh.
And it has scientific committees that are made of experts.
Right.
And I'm on the 3-year-old now International Scientific Committee on Aerospace Heritage. I'm one of the founding members. And we have just in the last month become an observer, which is a status that is accorded that allows you to interact with the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs.
Oh, wow.
So that gives us a kind of a platform through which we can engage them on this issue of protecting heritage in space.
So you can
going
start
forward.
working on them now.
Exactly. We've tried that for a couple of years, and we finally got that status. So now going forward at their meetings, we can be present, we can express opinions. So that's a really important step. That just happened in December.
What's the sense you get from people when you're when you're dealing with those kind of organizations? Is there pushback, or are they generally open to this kind of stuff? What's your
Being
sense?
under ICOMOS was huge. Being a part of this organization that is widely recognized as the gold standard for scientific understanding of heritage,
just bumps you up a little.
It opens that door.
Yeah.
Right. So the UN is going to take you seriously if you're a part of that.
Right. Okay.
We formed this committee under that, and it's taken us a few years. The other thing that we did a year ago was that we were able to nominate the moon to the World Monuments Fund watch list.
Oh, wow.
As heritage under threat.
Yeah.
So, and that is both the natural and the cultural heritage of the moon.
Yeah.
Depending on like what we decide to do with it environmentally, but also that there is cultural heritage associated with the moon, both in terms of how it's understood by people on the Earth and in terms of the objects that are historic that have been placed there.
Right.
And so that was like a big splash and like get the public's attention, because nobody, like, I think everybody saw, like, they put the moon on the watch list. How could that be? What does that mean? Right. So it's a way to really jumpstart that conversation.
And normalize it for people. So they start going like, oh, yeah, well, I mean.
No, we need to protect that, right? Because the World Monuments Fund, they're smart people and they know about this. So if they're taking it seriously, I should take it seriously.
So no more X Prizes saying, let's try to get yourself down on a heritage site.
That competition ended, I believe, in 2017.
Right. But you don't think we're going to have a repeat of anything like that hopefully because of this kind of stuff?
I'm sure if some billionaire got it in their heads to take it on as a project, it might happen.
Or even I can
certainly see that in 2069 that people will be trying to recreate that visit. So like we saw in 2011 with the South Pole trips, that people tried to recreate that first moment of reaching the South Pole. So like there were companies that would fly you all the way but the last few hundred yards, or you could start from the edge of Antarctica and follow the exact path that was followed. There were different levels, and companies are going to want to do this and provide that service, and people are going to want to pay for it. Oh, it's 100 years later.
Yeah, I went and visited.
So I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that then. That's it's okay. It's 40 years away, but
Mm-hmm.
in the meantime, between the sure, of course, I can see the possibility, depending on how far we advance in terms of making it
Well, and this is an issue
available.
for tourist sites, anyways, right? I mean, you get in the world of Instagram and TikToks and stuff. You've got parts of the world that are suddenly being inundated by people that wouldn't normally have been.
And it happens when they get World Heritage status.
Oh, really?
Right. So it's a little bit of yes. I mean, where do people want to go? They want to
wow.
They want to check off the biggest and the best.
Right.
They want to go to Machu Picchu. They want to go to the Parthenon.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
So they want to go to the Grand Canyon. Whatever's the biggest things. What are the biggest things are the things on that list? I want to go there. So there is absolutely a backlash of tourism to those terrestrial sites.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to suggest is that maybe like Antarctica, which is a place that tourists can go, but most don't. It's very difficult to go there at the moment. There's actually systems under the Antarctic Treaty, which is not a UN treaty, but there's systems under the Antarctic Treaty where states can nominate areas that they will protect, that they say, we will take on the responsibility of protecting this. So I would love to see the United States take on the role of saying, our job is going to be maintaining Tranquility Base.
Yeah.
And that means, that means we're not going to allow anyone within 2 kilometers of the site.
No, that's interesting.
Nobody can visit it.
If the Navy's doing
until we figure out how to do it.
Yeah, if the Navy's doing that with satellites, then I sort of feel sort of slightly hopeful that that's going to happen with this.
They're doing it out of this pride, right? They're doing it out of this. They want to show
America
off.
loves pride. We love our pride, as you know.
Well, yeah. So, in the current context, let's not talk about that.
Exactly.
It's too painful.
Yeah.
But I would love to see. I mean, who better to take on the responsibility of caring for a site? I would say than the U.S. If that's the site, and by the way, under the Antarctic Treaty, those activities of preservation are actually vetted every 5 years by all the rest of the countries that are involved.
Oh wow! Just to make sure that it's being done properly and
exactly. Yeah. So there is a kind of check and balance. Like, did you implement the plan that you said you were going to? Right. How did that work out for the site? Right. What can we do better in the next 5 years? So it's not just like you're in charge of it, and it's certainly not this is your territory.
Right.
It's not the same as
not handing it over. You're just saying you're caretaking for it, basically.
Because the Antarctic Treaty does not recognize any territorial claims.
Right. Yeah.
So this is why it's similar to outer space.
It's very similar because it's also the same geopolitical issues around it as well. I mean, these are all going to become strategic,
That Antarctica, well, it's a little different because Antarctica explicitly is not available for any other activity but science. It is explicitly not available for resource extraction. It is explicitly not available for military activity.
Yet.
No, that's the treaty.
Really?
That has been signed. Really? So somebody can abrogate that treaty, but under the treaty, everybody, which is all the countries that have activities in Antarctica. They have all said, we are not going to extract resources and we are not going to have military activity.
Oh, good. Okay.
Military activity is is prohibited largely by the Outer Space Treaty, but the resource extraction is not.
Right.
So there are differences.
And that's messy too. So
very messy.
Yeah. Okay. Urban Images says, what do you think about using one of the Apollo landing sites for studying the long-term exposure of the materials left behind? There might be competing interests in the same site. How do you see it managed?
That's a great question. And I participated in something called a Lunar Surface Science Workshop, which was sponsored by NASA. I want to say it was about 4 or 5 years ago. It was I guess it must have been 2020 or 2021 because it was in the kind of lockdown phase. So it was all remote. And for some reason, this one was about the permanently shattered regions of the moon, which are the kind of the target area because that's where the water ice is suspected to be most concentrated.
And people are really interested in around this time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Right. So, and that we've actually already sent a probe to crash into. So we've seen water ice ejected. But for some reason, heritage was also lumped into that workshop. And so I participated in it. And one of the things that I contributed to it was a kind of a list of like, what is the checklist that you would want to go through if you were going to do this? And I alluded to some of these ideas before, because again, nobody can stop somebody from going back there.
Right.
The U.S. federal government continues to own the equipment that's at each of these Apollo sites.
Right.
So you can't take it and then sell it.
Right. Well, that's a good thing.
Right. So because people would absolutely want to do that.
Or take a chunk of it,
salvage it, right? Yeah. So, but I can imagine that NASA might want to go back and say, I want to cut a piece off of this rover or off of this LEM because I want to see what the effects of now, close to 60 years of exposure to the lunar environment is on aluminum, steel, mylar, whatever it is. And so I can't tell them, no, you can't do that. The best I can do is say, if you're going to do that, this is what you should do. And the first thing you should say is like, what is the least invasive way that I can do this?
Right.
Does it require actually visiting the site? If it requires actually visiting the site, which site? Does it have to be an Apollo site? Could it be a surveyor site? Could it be a ranger site? Could it be a rocket body? Could it be an impact site of some other piece of equipment? Right? If
with less historical value than
the more historical value you go up, the greater the justification that you have to make for why you're going to do this. And second of all, to list as many of the risks as you could possibly imagine, because the fact is that risks could certainly be unforeseeable of damage that we're going to do. But you want to try and say, like, what are all the things we can imagine, worst case scenario that would happen by us trying to approach the site and take this material? And then what are all the ways you're going to mitigate this? And then what are all the different kinds of science that you could do with this so that you don't say like, oh, but we didn't do this other kind of science. Now we got to go back a second time.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you make it so you're only visiting once and you're getting what you need, and it's the minimum amount needed, not the maximum amount needed. Right. Thinking through that way, limiting the threat as the risk as much as you possibly can.
Right.
To the items that are most historically significant.
So you would set up a sort of a list of key things to consider and approaches to take as a guideline that they could then use.
Exactly.
Right. That's smart.
And the less historically significant it is, the more risks you can take.
Right.
And the more often you can go back, or the different kinds of materials you can take, or the longer you can stay there.
I'm assuming there's a grade to these things anyways, right? I mean, there's some kind of how would these...
NASA doesn't make that list, but heritage professionals know how to make that list. We have established practices and charters. So there's something called the Burra Charter, BURRA, which is named for a place in Australia.
Right.
And it actually lists like these are the considerations that you need to take when you're dealing with a piece of heritage. Right.
Australia's probably a good place for this stuff, actually, isn't it? Because Australia is very good at working on preserving their past and cultural elements of it as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that was great. What have we got? As your background is in ancient Greece, this is also Urban Images. As your background is in ancient Greece, when you started researching the International Space Station, was there any moment of recognition, like something that can relate what humans were doing in ancient times, but are also doing on the ISS? That's a great question, actually. Interesting.
Yeah, so I guess the way that I link truly my work in antiquity has been about intercultural contact, how ideas get exchanged between cultures when they meet each other, often in a kind of a colonization type context,
because that's how often they are. Yeah,
absolutely. And also through the lens of a particular kind of evidence, which is pottery. So what I've particularly looked at is how Greek pottery has traveled to, say, Spain, Italy, France, even Germany in antiquity. Like, what are the people in those countries interested in? Why are they acquiring this Greek stuff? They probably never even heard of Greece if they're really far away. So what do they think about this? They might not be using it in the way that it's intended to be used. So those ideas, absolutely, all of those come to fruit in my ISS study, where I'm dealing with a multicultural group of people. And particularly, like, we're currently dealing with the galley. We have a square in the galley, and like, how are they eating? What are the tools that they're using? How are they mixing things from different cuisines? I mean, the famous example is that there's no bread on the ISS. There's only tortillas. Because, and the reason for that, if people don't know, is that, like I said, inhalation hazards, you want to avoid them. Bread makes crumbs. Tortillas don't make crumbs. So they're trying to minimize that so they don't get any bread other than tortillas. And I think it's a fabulous thing that this indigenous food turns out to be crucial. to how we have to live in space right now.
That is
like
amazing.
In the future, we may figure out how to have other kinds of breads in space, but at the moment we can't, and the only way we can do it is with this traditional knowledge.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So
that's a great
those are ways that I think about this.
Justin, Bodymaker says, Justin, are you a Netflix consultant, and would you like to be one?
I am not, but depending on the show, could be. No Ancient Aliens. I would not do Ancient Aliens.
No Ancient Aliens. You're done on that.
None of that. Yeah, none of that. No pseudo archaeology, which is a lot of what popular culture archaeology is these days.
It's that chariot of the gods. It's the
It's really something. Who Eric von Daniken, who just passed away, right? So So I would avoid those kinds of things, but with the right project, absolutely, I would be interested in that. Sure.
It's amazing because the consultant side of the television, the film and television world is always I think it's kind of heartbreaking in a way, because you can be as accurate as you can possibly be, but when it comes down to the day of shooting or the schedule of an actor or it just all it's there's often times where you go like, well, I guess they ran out of money on that or whatever, because trying to be true to the sciences and the obviously the archaeological standpoint is going to be difficult. But that's I'd love to see that.
And I'm literally 2 miles from Netflix headquarters, so there
you go. Yeah. Make a call. Available for consulting. Okay, now my phone is trying to.
I'm probably pretty cheap too.
Don't tell them that.
Standards. I know standards.
You got to charge way up. That's the key. They only know you're good if you're charging a fortune. How are you for time, by the way, Justin? Are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because
I have nothing else
here.
Yeah, please. If people are willing to listen, I'm willing to talk.
Oh, fantastic. This is amazing. If you had a chance to depict the field of space archaeology in a movie or a TV show, how would you go about it? You can sue existing movies or shows as an example. I guess you can use existing movies. I was like, you're going to sue someone? You're going to use existing movies or shows as an example, or something from scratch. So your call. Yeah.
Well, I haven't really thought about this, but obviously, so there's the way archaeology is portrayed in popular culture, right? Yes. Whether it's Indiana Jones or Lara Croft. I have a hat. It just doesn't look like that hat. Right. I do not have the bullwhip. Right. I don't wear short shorts and a tank top.
Right. But you're not Lara Crofting this stuff. Yeah.
For everybody's benefit, I am not doing that. So it's a little hard to think. Like, the reality of what we do is not so exciting. Right. So we'd have to find some middle ground. It's not day to day. I will say, like, I have a student who just finished one of the squares, finished the data, and we were starting to do the analysis. And giddy is a great word to describe how I felt as we were just doing the very first summary statistics of what this square looked like, and some averages, basically, like on a given day, like what did it look like? Oh my god, it's like
it would be. I feel like it'd be an amazing element in a film, if that makes sense. Like as a sort
montage.
If
we're doing a montage,
seeing how things are moving around a site and engaging like that. Those
But look, the fact is, I mean, it's interesting. What I think about is what future space archaeology will be, and the eventual ability of archaeologists to go to space.
Right.
And so I think it could be really interesting and exciting to have that. Like, what does the first archaeology of Tranquility Base look like? How can we imagine that?
I'm fascinated.
Right. How would that be painted in a For All Mankind, which I heard that they're just coming back for another season in March. Yeah, it was just announced today. But in an alternate history of space development, like, what does that look like? What is an archaeology of that look like? And can it be seen as contributing to what is being done with the development of human life in space? Again, that's what I'm really working on. That's what that's the core of why I'm doing this. Is how can I show what my field can contribute to living better? And contemporary archaeology as a whole, I think there's a huge growth area for our field. Getting more students, if we can convince, and I'm planning to write a book about this. I haven't pitched to anybody.
It feels like there should be a book. Yeah,
but a book that really shows, hey, company trying to achieve industrial problem X. Like, hey, guess what? You can use not just people who are trained in industrial design. You can use people who actually study how this design has functioned, really actually functioned
Mm,
in your own society.
mm,
What can
mm.
we do with that? Right?
It's
How will
very
that inform your future?
it's also very MacGyver because in many films you have people going back and trying to use what they've got in what resources they have that have been left behind, whether it's in a plane crash or whatever.
Mhm.
It's there's definitely. Well, and also the OSINT stuff as well. Just the whole idea of like figuring out what's happening in a place without being there is. Yeah, I think there's a lot of I can see a lot of that stuff. I'm it's giving me ideas already.
In this
Um,
case, the resource is kind of the intellectual information
mm,
about how this was used
right, right,
that can
right.
tell you, like, okay, well, this is how we need to modify this in order to achieve our desired
Mm,
outcome. Because
mm,
that was not our desired outcome. It was different in this way, that way, or the other way. And so this is how we can move forward with new designs, because
right.
we now understand that this is what people do when they're presented with that design.
Mm. Well, and there's definitely an engineering. There's a sort of an issue that comes up with engineering. We see it in assistive tech as well, and accessibility stuff, where
Mm-hmm.
where there's a tendency to solve it, and this is how you solve it without talking to the people.
100%.
It's like that's you know what I mean. Like it's without talking to
100%.
the people who are experiencing this stuff. There was a wonderful article about this where there was an artist. I think she's an artist with a partial limb, and she'd been
Was it
given this.
Veronica Modesta?
Is that who it was?
Probably.
It was just an amazing story because had this wonderful robotic thing, and she said, "Yeah, it's great." And then the battery dies. I really like the rubber end that just allows me to, but people are uncomfortable with that because it's
Mhm.
not a hand. It
Yep.
doesn't and engineers want that complicated thing. And you understand it's all out of the goodness of their heart and their interest in making people's lives better. But if you don't have those experiences, you don't have you're operating in a vacuum.
There's a wonderful book about this
Mm,
that was published 2 years ago by my friend and colleague Ashley Shew, SHEW,
okay.
called Technoableism. And
Oh
Ashley
wow, yeah.
Ashley is a prosthesis user,
Oh
as well
wow.
as a science and technology studies scholar. And
Ooh.
it's a fabulous book, very, very approachable, not
Mm,
very with that name technoableism. It sounds like
yeah,
it could be
yeah.
very kind of jargony, but it's not. It's not at all, and it's beautiful how she
Oh,
writes about it.
fantastic.
And you're exactly right. And something we were actually thinking about, she and I and a colleague who's an engineer, was how could we design a prosthetic that would help people in space? Because in
Mm,
fact, everybody who goes to space is disabled by
mm.
virtue of the environment.
Right,
Right?
right.
We
When
all become disabled by going to space.
Yeah.
And I just want to pitch this as well. I work in a volunteer capacity with a group called Astro Access, and you can look them up,
Yeah.
astroaccess.org. And what they do is they do research using parabolic flights and
Mm,
also engagement with space companies to open up avenues for people with disabilities to participate in space science and in
mm,
space activities. And
mm.
so we saw Michi, forgetting her
Michi. Yeah,
surname,
we've met her. We
who,
met
who
her at
just
ESA. Yeah, yeah.
right, who
Fantastic.
just went on that
Blue
right.
Origin.
She's
Yeah.
associated with Astro Access as well,
Oh, fantastic.
and
She's amazing. Yeah.
participated in prior tests with Blue Origin
Yeah.
for how do people with disabilities get in and out, ingress egress.
Yeah.
So Astro Access is a phenomenal
Oh,
organization that
fantastic.
has
This
been
is
leading the way to understand, like, what are the limits that are
mm,
faced by people with disabilities, but also how are there artificial obstacles being
yeah.
put in the way of people with disabilities
Right.
to stop them from going to space and participating, and what can we learn from the
Mm,
experience of people with disabilities that makes life better for everybody in
yeah.
space.
Yeah.
That's really crucial. So I'm the partnerships lead of that organization,
Oh,
trying to help them
fantastic.
to engage with space
Mm,
companies, and see how we can push forward.
that's
That's
amazing. Well,
because, as I say,
Michi's a
everybody in
fantastic.
space
Yeah.
is disabled,
Yeah. I wondered about that because
because we're not sorry, not
we're not
environment, we're not
designed.
evolutionarily adapted
Yeah.
for that environment.
And who knows? There may be, we may be overlooking possible advantages to not having specific, physical attributes of some sort. There's all sorts of stuff that could come into play.
So there are people who have suggested, for example, using the toilet in space
Mm,
is a nightmare.
I can imagine.
If
Yeah.
every astronaut had an ostomy it would be so much more hygienic, an ostomy port
Oh, really?
installed, where they could just hook up a bag
man.
and then
Yeah.
unhook the bag. I know it's not something everybody wants to think about. Like if I go to space, like
No,
that,
but it's true.
it would sort the problem out in a much easier and more hygienic way.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out that people talk about going to Mars, and we know that astronauts' vision is deeply affected by long-term time in
radiation,
zero or microgravity.
Oh, is it the gravity?
Yeah. By pressure on the optic nerve, we believe is the culprit. We don't know for sure. We know this happens for men because we have lots of data for men. Yeah. We're not so clear on women. That's primarily because we don't have so much data on women. If it turns out that women are not affected by this, then you might say, look, that's a good argument for sending an all-female crew to Mars.
Yeah.
But if it affects women as well, then you might say, well, that's a good argument for sending an all-blind crew to Mars.
Right. Because by the time they get there, they're going to be equipped for the.
It won't matter.
That's
and then you design the interface, design the spacecraft, design the tasks for people who don't use vision.
Yeah.
And it won't, and there will be no detriment to what they're able to accomplish.
Yeah. You can use less electricity too, because you don't need the lights, you don't need all the
True. Yeah, but I mean this is thinking about like who can actually accomplish the tasks we're sending them to accomplish.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to design an astronaut, I mean,
why would you send people with vision who are going to become blind?
Yeah.
And maybe not able to fulfill the tasks by the time they arrive?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
I love it. That's exactly the kind of stuff that's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to talking to Mishi about it all, because
Penthouse, I believe it's Penthouse.
Penthouse, that's it. Yeah. There's always someone in the chat who knows everything. It's amazing. They're like, it's like
I didn't even look at the chat. It just finally came to me.
Oh, really? Oh, good for you. God, no, I'm terrible with that. Okay, I've got one last question, and then I will let you go, because my God, I'm so sorry. We're almost 2 hours in.
It's awesome. I'm loving this.
Oh, me too. God, that's the problem, is I can talk forever. Okay, how would your dream space archaeology museum look? Is it a museum that would like to create? Is it a museum that you would like to create for this field, or use some other method of preserving it for the society in the future? So, a space archaeology museum. How do you see that? Or is it in situ?
Yeah, right. So that's part of the question. Like if sky's the limit, this is what we might want to do.
Yeah.
If money and engineering is no problem.
Right.
So I will say I am a consultant to the Air and Space Museum in Washington. On
how do you have time to do anything?
It's a lot. It's a lot.
I even more appreciate this now, knowing how many things you've got going.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even tell you, like, one of the things I want to do is I want to preserve the smell of ISS. That's another thing that I'm trying to do.
I think you mentioned that when we first talked. That's wild.
Because
Ode to ISIS.
this kind of, it actually gets into a little bit of what the person is asking, because the question is, how do you tell the story? And with ISS, if we're going to deorbit it, 60% of it is going to burn up in the atmosphere. Probably, I'm guessing, based on the Columbia investigation, that 40% of it which would be like 125 tons, will survive to hit the Pacific Ocean and sink 4,000 to 5,000 meters.
Wow.
To the bottom. So,
can we visit?
Whatever.
Can we check that out?
I would really like to visit Mir, which is also in 4,000 meters of water, and I'm pretty sure I know where it is. But that's like a multi-million-dollar expedition, and I can't find anybody to bankroll it.
So, you'd use one of the robo subs.
Yeah, absolutely. You would have to. You couldn't use a crewed vehicle to do that. I don't think. And I wouldn't want to bring anything back. I would just want to see what survived, so that would help us to understand what's going to happen with ISS. Because Mir is the only space station that anybody has purposely deorbited.
Right.
All of the other space stations have just fallen out of the sky and landed wherever they happen to land.
It seems so random. Yeah.
Like Skylab in Australia, or Salyut 7 landed in Argentina.
Yeah.
The rest of them, fortunately, have landed in the water. Anyway.
Luckily, there's a lot of water on our planet. That's the
exactly.
Yeah.
We're not going to worry about the sea life and what we're doing to them with these toxic chemicals or radioactive materials or whatever. But yes, for us, it's okay.
Yeah.
But how do we tell the story? And it's very difficult to bring anything back from ISS. This is what I'm consulting with them on. Like, what objects would you try and bring back that could tell that story? And I say, like, the table That'd be like an evocative thing because that's the crew, shared and maintained their social relationships and ate and talked and whatever they did in their leisure time. I don't know if the door will fit through the cargo dragon hatch. So maybe
the table will actually fit in there or not?
So that's our only way of getting something back, right?
Yeah,
so I honestly don't know. I'm not. It'd be tight, I think. So telling the story of ISS, I was thinking about smell because everybody who pays a lot of attention to ISS knows that the smell is terrible.
I've heard the most.
It's notoriously bad.
Yeah.
And I have smelled it when they open the cargo in front of me, and it is truly atrocious.
Really?
But by the same token, smell is our sense that's connected to memory making. The only sense that we have that's connected directly to memory making through the olfactory nerve and bulb to the amygdala and hippocampus, where we make memories. And that's why when you smell something, it can take you instantly back to your childhood.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah.
And so I was thinking, can we sample ISS's smell and then
ruin that memory for everybody,
and then we can replicate that? No, well, the fact that it's a bad smell is also important because it's symptomatic of where we are in our baby steps towards living life in space. Right. And the fact that it smells so bad is because there's no showers. They only can clean themselves with wet towels. They can't change their clothes but every 2 weeks. They have to exercise for 2 to 3 hours a day. It's been closed with people inside of it. Almost 300 people have visited it in 25 years. Been closed for that long. The garbage is rotting. We understand why it smells so bad, but this is what the reality of living in space is right now. It will not be like that in the future, hopefully. And future generations might be interested in understanding that this is what it meant for the first time to live permanently off of the Earth.
Well, yeah, and look at the way we look back on Victorian times and before germ theories and all sorts of what did
that smell like?
Exactly.
Wouldn't that be evocative?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Wouldn't that really get you?
We watched Amadeus the other day again because my son had never seen it, and just a gorgeous film, like just absolutely gorgeous. But the whole time I kept thinking like they didn't wash. Just like
a lot of cologne. It's a lot of cologne.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot of cologne and powders and all sorts of stuff. I'll just double check. There's no other questions before I.
But these are the things I think. Like, how can we think outside the box of how we tell the story? So I hope that answers the question.
Well, you seem to be like a specialist in thinking outside the box because the idea that
I don't have a choice.
Exactly. There you go. I mean, it's so what's okay. So if people want to get sort of active in this or are interested in this or want to follow up on this, what are the steps? Like let's say you're a student at school, you're thinking about getting into some kind of area of space or history or archaeology. What's any sort of obvious paths or things that tips or anything you could
there is no obvious path. And
that's
what I would
great
say,
though.
In a sense, yes. Here's what I would say. There is, if you're thinking about doing what I do, that is to say, like I'm a professor at a university and I'm a space archaeologist.
Yeah.
Nobody is hiring for those jobs. Those jobs don't exist. They just don't exist, right?
Right.
Because there's only a handful of us, and all of us came to it from some other kind of archaeology.
Right.
Alice started doing Paleolithic stone tools.
Wow.
That's what she started doing, right? So she made her way to space. I made my way from ancient Greece and Rome. Beth O'Leary, who's really, I didn't mention her, but she's kind of the godmother of the entire space archaeology clan, and she started doing work in the Yukon. So like all of us have come in different ways to this. And there, even contemporary archaeology, which is obviously a broader subfield, is pretty limited, and it's maybe only starting to see a job or two. There are other things that academic departments are like, no, we really need to hire for this or that, whatever you'd say. So my advice to students who come and talk to me is, like, if you want, ultimately, your goal is to be an archaeologist who's working on space, you're going to have to take a kind of circuitous route towards that, where you're doing more historical archaeology. Like I say, the last 200 or last 400 years, you're learning with someone. You get an advisor who's open-minded to you thinking about space. And you can do that work, but you have to also have kind of like other tools in your toolbox for what you're going to offer the institution that's going to hire you. What other kinds of courses can you teach? What other skills do you have? And the academic job market is a complete nightmare. So you absolutely have to have a plan B anyway for what you could do in the workforce. But what I would say is, if you do an anthropology degree and then get internships with NASA,
Right. Yeah.
right, or another space
Or
agency, or
ESA.
with
Yeah.
or ESA, or with a
Yeah.
company that's developing space habitats,
Mm.
and start to apply the general anthropological principles, because archaeology is a subfield of anthropology.
Mm.
Start to apply those principles, and be cognizant of the material culture aspect of it, which is the archaeological
Mm.
aspect of it, and think about how that can be brought together. It's going to be a slow thing to
Mm.
get this moving. I am so excited to see what the next generation of space archaeologists will do, because they will be thinking about completely different problems and questions than I am, and using different evidence and having different access to that evidence.
It's
But
also, I think it's
we're
kind
not
of
there yet.
AI proof too. I mean, in a way, if you're looking for a profession that, you need a human has to look at what humans, the messes humans are making to analyze that kind of stuff. It's not just a data. It's not the kind of science that can be done with a prompt. Basically, I feel like this seems to be something that's uniquely human, and it requires a human intuition and human, emotion to make sense of it.
I'll say two things to that. First of all, I'd say I hope that everybody who's doing any academic research is not using AI for their primary kind of like observations and
Right,
analysis.
right.
That is it, with the current state of
It's
technology.
a
There's
tool,
just
not
not
a
it's
yeah,
just but it's just not appropriate at the current state of
yeah,
technology.
yeah.
Second of all, I am using AI
Hmm.
to automate certain aspects
The photo
of
analysis, I've
what,
got to
for
imagine.
example.
Yeah.
So I am collaborating with computer scientists. Like, if you are training an AI yourself,
Mm,
that's a very different thing from saying I'm going to go to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini,
right.
and I don't know what they've been trained on, except that I do actually know that Claude stole my book and 6 of my
Oh,
articles.
is it in with it? You
The
go.
lawsuit, yes, absolutely, I do
So
know that.
you're gonna get they're gonna offer you a settlement.
I know if I ask them about my own work, it will immediately spit out a bibliography of 20
Right,
things that I have not written,
right.
that are
Really?
often collaborations with other real scholars that I don't know.
Oh, wow. I'm in movies I didn't know I was in.
See, exactly. So this is like, it's not there,
Yeah.
right? The LLMs are not there. So,
Mm,
but not to say they don't have uses, but I am using an AI, specifically computer vision,
right.
but we're having to train it on the data that we're generating out of the square observation. So, like,
Mm,
all of those
mm,
items, we draw a polygon around it, and then we link it to an identity, a
mm,
name, right?
right.
And that's the training data. That
Right.
requires a human first to do that.
Yeah.
That's the training data that is going to go to an AI, and then look at all those historic photographs, those
Mm.
25 or whatever thousand photographs that we have,
And
and say,
track
okay,
movement
this
and
is the person, this is the location, these are all the objects in
mm,
on this date at this time, right?
right.
That's how we're going to use that. We haven't gotten to that point yet, because it turns out we had to train an algorithm how to recognize astronauts,
Ah.
which you can't just use the off the shelf Amazon AWS algorithm for that, because astronauts can be like this,
Oh. Oh,
or
wow.
or like this, and
With
the
and
algorithm
hair up to here and yeah.
recognizes eyes, nose, mouth in this configuration, and
Yeah.
doesn't handle upside down.
Well, and also being in space and low microgravity, it has a different effect on your face, right? It's changing
100%.
those. It's changing those features.
Right. So we
That's
found out that
wild.
it was low quality for recognition of astronauts, even though they are
Mm,
all public figures. We had to train them on our
that
own
is
photos,
wild. Okay.
and then also we had to then, on the specific architecture of ISS, we
Mm,
had to train it on all the thousands of pictures. Like, this is that location,
mm,
and then now the objects. So this is the
right.
last hurdle, is the objects, and we're using the square data to do that training. And then when that's done, hopefully we will get high quality results
Mm,
out of that, because it takes me 2 to 3 hours to do each photo manually.
wow. Yeah, I mean,
And so if
that
it can
is
do it in seconds or less than
25. You
that
said you
time,
had 25,000 or
great.
something at this point?
Yeah,
25,000?
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just not feasible. But with the algorithm, if we train it properly, and
Mm. I've
then
got
that's
friends.
useful.
I've got friends who are entomologists who have just started because they're doing so much of observing insects and such
Yep.
in their movements and mating patterns
Yep.
and all that kind of stuff. They were doing that manually. They're now trying to work out how to automate it, because again, it just speeds up the science as a tool, but not as your primary, as you say, not as your
And if
primary.
you know
Yeah.
how it was built,
Yeah.
right? If you know what's under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah. Because there's all sorts of biases, cultural.
It's also more ethical. It's also more ethical because I know that's not stolen from somebody.
Right. Right. Wow. God, it's a complicated world. I do. But this just opens up a whole other world of. I mean, I said this before. I'm going to say it again. I suggest to everybody that they start looking at technology as if it was 100 years in the future and we're looking back on it, because I think I see it a lot with the old. I mean, I got into computers when they were just starting out. They were basically kits at that point. And you can't get them anymore. You can't find them anymore. They're recreating them and doing new versions of them and stuff. But that is a technology that was seen as completely. I'm so sorry. I'm going to hang up on my mom. And it's the kind of thing that I've completely lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the computers and the development of the technology and what's available.
They've disappeared because no one wants a big old CRT screen or whatever it is that they, so, and those are historical items now that will probably, I imagine at some point be lost or worth a fortune, because we've seen them as entirely disposable, so.
Yep. Ephemera.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Justin, thank you so much for this. In that I'm now getting calls from my mother. I imagine I should probably, get
well, aren't you done yet?
Yeah, it's like, well, what's funny is I imagine she's probably calling to tell me about she's taking an astronomy course at 80. What is she, 83, 84? Awesome. Yeah, and she's still doing courses at U of T. It's amazing. She's just, I think I know where I get my, the lifelong learning thing. Justin, awesome. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for doing this, just in general. It's just opened up a whole other world.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks both to you, David, and to Agne behind the scenes.
Agne, who put it all together. Yes, it's fantastic. Yes. And I saw Cal there in the modding in the chat as well. So thank you for that. Justin, where can people get in touch with you, or is there a best place where you?
The best place may be Blue Sky, where I'm at JSTP Walsh.
Okay, I'll put links
.bsky.social. Okay. I'm on LinkedIn. If people are on there, pretty easy to find. Not a lot of space archaeologists. Those are my two primary platforms.
Yeah, you came up pretty fast. I noticed. Yeah, I haven't. Blue Sky is something I haven't really explored, but and LinkedIn. I mean, they're all weird, but
I had to get out of the darkness of Twitter. I have to say, it's very depressing.
I'm feeling like we're talking to Agne about it, but it's part of the problem is just how distracting the stuff is. There's just so many more interesting things to be doing.
Oh, Blue Sky is not necessarily less than that. It's
right.
It's just a little less. It's a different atmosphere.
Yeah, it's definitely a different atmosphere. Anyways, Justin, thank you again. This has been amazing. Thank you everyone for the questions. Thank you, Agnes, of course, for organizing everything. And my mom sounds awesome. Yes, it's true. I will go talk to my mother.
Okay, great. Say hi.
All right, I'll take us offline now.
Thank you so much. Okay.
So until we geek again, I'll say be brave.